Chapter 467. When the Taoist looked over, his gaze was extremely unfriendly, as if he had mistaken Zhang Yan as someone from the Lai Xian sect. Zhang Yan did not mind. He raised his hands slightly and was about to bow in reply, but at this moment, he suddenly frowned, feeling that something was wrong. His thoughts turned extremely fast. His gaze shifted and he saw Yang Changgong's puzzled expression. He immediately knew what the problem was. If the other party was an elder of the Zhenluo Union, how could he not recognize Liang Changgong? There must be something wrong with this person. Just now, when he thought of this, the Taoist's gaze sharpened and he raised his hand. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and a silver shuttle that was overflowing with cold air shot out. It was like a flash of light, and in the blink of an eye, it had already flown in front of him. The speed of this shuttle was unimaginably fast. Even when the heaven and earth leaf jumped up from Liang Changgong's hand to protect its owner, it was still a step too slow. At this moment, the star's sword pellet felt that its owner was in danger and flew out from between Zhang Yan's eyebrows. A ray of sword light instantly collided with it, but this shuttle was obviously not an ordinary item. The moment it came into contact with it, it was knocked away. Looking at the silver shuttle again, it actually did not reduce its speed at all. Zhang Yan did not panic. With a thought, the treasured robe on his body suddenly moved like waves. His entire body was emitting a misty light that was at least 3 feet long. The silver shuttle crashed into him, and when it tore through the light, it actually gave off a grinding sound that made one's teeth ache. It only stopped when it was about to touch his clothes. At this moment, the Taoist's fingers clasped together, as if he had cast some kind of spell. The silver shuttle shook and suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. Only a shocking roar could be heard. In the fog, a white tiger with a murderous aura leaped out. Its entire body was bright, as if it was made of silver. Its 4 claws were surrounded by Xianling Qi. With just one leap, it pounced forward. Zhang Yan felt a strong gust of wind blowing on his face, and the ground around him felt like it was collapsing. He clenched his fists, and with a loud bang, he punched out. He summoned a Yuanying, who had a 5-colored radiance behind his back, out from the top of his head. With a push of one of his hands, he unleashed a protective treasure light. A golden light spread out like an umbrella, and streaks of light fell down like tassels, protecting his corporeal body. At this time, the earth-splitting universe leaf spun and flew over, swaying in the air, and a curtain of golden light enveloped the white tiger. Although this ferocious beast's body was huge, it was extremely powerful. However, his movements were nimble. He leaped to the side and dodged the attack. That was not the end of it. He stomped on the ground with his 4 legs, and the wind and clouds lifted him up. After circling once, it came to bite him from the back. Suddenly, from behind Zhang Yan Yuanying's back, a stream of watery light emerged and flowed, forming a layer of light mist and water barrier. And within it, there was a thick yellow light that stood like a wall. The 2 lights intertwined and merged, like the mountains and the sea, and its power multiplied. The white tiger leaped a few times, but it was not able to break into the inner circle. Instead, it was washed out by the surging water. The Taoist priest who was standing far away was shocked. When Zhang Yan fought with the 7 elders of Lai Xian sect, he hid in the dark and watched the battle. Because he looked down on the elders of Lai Xian sect, he did not take this technique to heart. Now that he experienced it personally, he could not help but be shocked. Although his white tiger shuttle had not been in his possession for a long time, it was still a profound weapon. He did not expect that it could not break such a strange technique. The battle between Zhang Yan and the few Yuanying Jinren of Lai Xian sect was not without gains. The Taixian true light was more flexible, and many of the mysteries of using it were more clear. It could be said that his battle power was a level higher than before. He had already stabilized the situation, and with a wave of his sleeve, the 5 spirits white carp shuttle was activated. It immediately scuttled out, and with a ray of spiritual light, it went straight for the white tiger. At the same time, the heaven and earth leaf also flipped in the air, and a ray of golden light rushed down. The two attacks came from the left and right, blocking the way to dodge. This time, the ferocious white carp shuttle had nowhere to hide. The Taoist priest saw that something was wrong, and with a shout, his mana surged up. Suddenly, a ray of light shot out from Yuan Ying's eyes, and landed on the shuttle's body, and actually fixed it in place. Then, he opened up his 5 fingers, and a ball of green gas rose into the air. Then, like thousands of willow branches, it swayed down with the wind, and grew longer and longer. After a few flutters, it was like a rope, and the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle was trapped inside. Seeing that the magical treasure was trapped, he immediately showed a happy expression, and with a spell, he wanted to pull the magical treasure back into his hand. Zhang Yan sneered, and raised his hand to point. With a rumble, the earth shook, and a ray of purple lightning rushed towards him. The Taoist priest's expression changed. How could he not know the power of this magical power? Before he came, his senior brother in the sect had repeatedly warned him to be careful of this magic. If he was struck by this divine lightning, the blue mist rope that he had painstakingly cultivated would definitely be broken. Helpless, he could only give up on the idea of taking the treasure, and retract the blue rope. He borrowed the wind to escape, and temporarily avoid the attack. The 5 spirits' white carp shuttle was free, and with a happy cry, it shrank and stretched, and a white light flashed, and it broke free. On the other side, Zhang Yan took advantage of the Taoist priest's distraction to use the longevity-locking sun cicada. It spun in the air, and with a press of his wrist, an incomparably clear and graceful clear light fell down, like a graceful butterfly, and swept towards the white tiger. Just now, this white tiger rolled, and avoided the heaven and earth leaf's attack, but it saw another 2 magical treasures rushing towards it. When it wanted to dodge, it was already a beat too late. Seeing that there was no way out, it lowered its head, and smoke rose, and once again transformed into a silver shuttle with 2 pointy ends, and a body like a spindle. With a ray of light, it sped away like lightning. Taoist Ing Wei waved his hand, and took it back, but his heart was stifled. This white tiger's refined shuttle was originally an offensive weapon, and since it was refined, it had never met a worthy opponent. How could it meet Zhang Yan today, and its hands and feet were tied, and it was difficult to display its power. He couldn't help but think to himself, my magical treasures are not as many as his, and it's difficult for me to defeat him. Wait until I go back and refine the 4 gods' mysterious shuttle, then I'll fight him again. Now that Zhang Yan had 3 Xian weapons with him, and all of them were good for both offense and defense. With these 3 treasures in hand, even if it was the 16-sect sword competition assembly, he would still be able to participate. Now that he had used all of them together, even though the Taoist priest's cultivation was profound, he was still at his wit's end. Since he couldn't win, there was no point in continuing to fight, and the Taoist priest suddenly had the intention to leave. Just as he was about to get up, Zhang Yan's eyes drooped, and he stood still. Suddenly, he lightly waved his sleeve, and a thread-like golden light flew up, circled around the field, and then disappeared. The Taoist priest's body suddenly stiffened, and then he let out a miserable howl. With a loud bang, smoke and clouds rolled and dispersed, and a black shadow that was as thick as a water bucket and 100 feet long scuttled up to the top of the clouds. The Taoist priest's resentful voice echoed in the astral currents, "Junior brother Zhang, good move. Today, I, Luo Canghai, have learned a thing or 2 from you. I, Luo Canghai, will meet you again in the future." Zhang Yan wasn't willing to let this person go so easily. With a snort, he waved his sleeve and chased after the Taoist priest. However, he saw a shadow on the horizon, like a meteor flying away, and after a few flashes, it disappeared. His eyes narrowed, and he said in a deep voice, "Minor heavens shifting escape technique?" Although the technique that the person used just now tried to conceal it, he could still see that it was extremely similar to the green spirit manifestation technique of the Qinsang school's 5 techniques and 3 scriptures. At that time, he had already suspected this person's identity. Now that he used this minor divine art and even called him junior brother, his identity was already obvious. He thought for a moment, and remembered that when the Taoist priest came, there were 4 auspicious lights following closely behind, so he turned his head to look at the top of the mountain. Looking carefully, he realized that there were actually 4 banners fluttering in the wind. The lights on the banners were erratic, and they condensed into resplendent light clouds. If they were to soar into the sky, looking from afar, it would look extremely like a cultivator flying in the sky. He secretly scoffed. This was enough to show that the other party came prepared, otherwise, he wouldn't have used such an item. This person really calculated well, and he grasped the timing very accurately. It just happened to be right after he fought with the 7 people from Lai Xian sect. Obviously, he wanted to take advantage of the fact that his magic power was greatly depleted to come up and take advantage of it. Moreover, if anyone was here and heard the meaning behind this person's words, they would probably subconsciously think that he was an elder of Zhenluo Union. With this layer of identity, and purposely acting as if it was a misunderstanding, then he would be in the right when he attacked. If it was someone who was slightly less vigilant, he would probably still be thinking about how to explain himself. In this way, it would be extremely easy for him to succeed. If it wasn't for Zhang Yan's cautious and meticulous mind, and seeing that something was wrong with Liang Changgong's body, even if he had the treasured clothing to protect him, he would probably still be at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan pondered for a while more. Now, he was curious as to how the other party had avoided his metal element true light. He pressed down on the cloud and arrived at the place where the Taoist just now escaped to. Looking down, he discovered that there was a black python's molted skin curled up on the ground. Roughly estimating, if it were to be spread out, it would be dozens of feet long. He walked around it a few times and thought to himself, this person must be a python spirit that attained Tao, which is why he could have such an item left behind. He must have used some kind of death substitution technique to escape from that slash just now. Thinking about this, he smiled faintly. This kind of technique would definitely damage one's vitality, and it was impossible to use it every time. If he met this person again, he would like to see how he would escape from it. A cloud of smoke flew over, and Liang Changgong landed beside him. He walked over in shock, cupped his hands, and said fearfully, "Spiritual Master Zhang, that person is definitely not an elder of my Zhenluo Union." Zhang Yan nodded and smiled, "Dao friend Liang, don't worry. I know that this person has a different origin, and he has nothing to do with your union." Liang Changgong's heart calmed down slightly. Just by seeing Zhang Yan fight against 7 elders of Xian cult alone, he knew that this person couldn't be offended. Especially since the Zhenluo Union's formation token was in this person's hands. If there really was a misunderstanding because of this, who knew what kind of disaster it would cause? He looked at the sky and thought to himself, strange, the place that Elder Duan is stationed at is only 4 hours away from Twin Moon Peak, so why hasn't he arrived yet? Could it be that something happened? He couldn't help but worry again. However, he didn't know that with such a huge commotion on the Golden Bridge of Extradition, the Zhenluo Union's elders stationed at various places had already sensed the abnormality. However, at that time, because they felt that there was a formation protecting Twin Moon Peak, they didn't pay much attention to it and just sat there quietly. It wasn't until later when the cultivators in Twin Moon City sent a letter that they found out that the 7th elder of Xian cult had entered Twin Moon Peak, and that there was no movement from the formation protecting the mountain. The elders were all indescribably shocked, and only then did they come out from where they were stationed and return to Twin Moon Peak to help. However, because they were worried that the strength of one person would be too weak, they hesitated to move forward. It was only in the evening that 5 elders hurried over with him. Chapter 468. August 20th, Feiyu Dao Palace. There were a total of 5 elders seated in the main hall. The first elder, Duan Hanfeng, sat in the seat of honor, while the second elder, Ouyang Su, sat in the second seat. Elder Che Yi, who had interacted with Zhang Yan before, was also present today. It was the first time for a few of the people present to see Zhang Yan. At this moment, their gazes towards him were filled with complicated emotions. Half a month had passed since the Battle of Twin Moon Peak. Letters from all over the world had already spread throughout the central continent. Among them, the most eye-catching one was Zhang Yan. These days, his reputation had spread far and wide. Who would have thought that he would be able to kill all the enemies of the Xian sect by himself? This action was truly terrifying. Everyone calculated carefully. The 9 elders of the Xian sect, including the 2 of them, were all killed by him. If the traitor of the Zhenluo alliance, Shang Ten, was added, then the number of Yuanying Jinren who had died in his hands was already more than 10. Such a battle record was truly shocking. Today, the 5 elders had set up a banquet and invited Zhang Yan here. Although it was clearly to thank him for killing the enemy and protecting the safety of the Twin Moon Peak, there was actually another reason. It was the token that Jinren Cheng had given him. With this item in hand, he could activate the 800-kilometer restriction array of the Twin Moon Peak and trigger water, fire, wind, and lightning. Even with the power of the ancestor statue of the Sun Wing Cliff, it was instantly suppressed and couldn't resist at all, let alone a group of people. There were only 12 elders left in the Zhenluo alliance. The reason why they didn't dare to sit here today was because they were worried about the token. If Zhang Yan had evil intentions in his heart, none of the people here would be able to survive. Although it was possible, they had to be careful. If they didn't take back such a killing weapon, they wouldn't be able to rest easy. The guest of honor today was Zhang Yan. The great elder, Duan Hanfeng, came from a large clan. His cultivation path had been smooth and he hadn't encountered any hardships. This person wasn't very shrewd. According to him, as long as the elders said a few good words, they would be able to take out the token from Zhang Yan. However, everyone present was a supremacy, and they did not see it as simply as he did. They understood very well in their hearts that it was impossible to retrieve this item without paying a price, and it was not about words. Thus, most of them spoke very little and only interjected occasionally. The only exception was an elder called Zhang Qianqiu. This person repeatedly urged Zhang Yan to drink, his words of flattery never ending. Jinren Zhang is from the Donghua continent, and he's from a prestigious sect. His cultivation is righteous. How could a clown like the Lai Xian sect be a match for him? You are asking to be humiliated in this fight, the result has long been decided. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Jinren is too kind. Duan Hanfeng raised his wine cup and toasted with one hand. Daoist Zhang, this is my Zhenluo Alliance's unique immortal brew, called Moon Palace's Zither Chant. It is just like playing the zither under an osmanthus tree. In the silence, a faint fragrance and warmth can only be tasted after drinking it to its fullest. Zhang Yan did not decline. He raised his cup and drank it in one gulp. Duan Hanfeng laughed loudly and drank his wine as well. Zhang Yan looked at this person a few times. This Zhenluo Alliance's Grand Elder was not old, and he had probably entered the Yuanying realm only a few decades ago. Moreover, this person was carefree and unrestrained. He did not look like a cultivator, but more like a celebrity in the mortal world. He could see that this person was not scheming, but was very passionate about having fun and enjoying life. He did not know how this person got to this position. His thoughts turned and he guessed a bit of the reason. The Zhenluo Alliance had more than 10 elders from all over the 9 provinces, and no one was willing to submit to anyone else. It was very suitable for such a person with no ambition and low cultivation to sit in this position. Zhang Yan turned his gaze and looked at Ouyang Su, who was sitting in the second seat. This person looked to be in his 50s, had a square face, and a pair of bright eyes. He sat there with a straight posture, and his every movement was methodical. Since he sat down, he had only said 2 sentences, and there were 3 clouds moving above his head. He was actually a stage 2 Yuanying cultivator. Zhang Yan realized that the 3 clouds above this person's head were condensed together, and his cultivation was probably higher than Gong Yangsheng's. It was rumored that this person was originally from a military family. When he was young, he went into the mountains to chase bandits, and accidentally lost his way. After wandering in the mountains for a few days, he accidentally entered the cave of a senior cultivator. This was a blessing in disguise, and just now, he had the opportunity to enter the Tao and comprehend the profound. However, the reason why Zhang Yan paid attention to this person was because this person was extremely famous in the Zhenluo alliance, and was known as Ping Dong's #1 in fighting. As a Yuanying cultivator, Duanmuli, the Grand Monastery Master of Kunming Island, was the reason why he was unable to fight back when Gua and Pang attacked him. It was rumored that he was once injured by this person. At this moment, Huang Zuoguang, who was sitting at the end of the table, stood up and raised his cup to Zhang Yan. He said sincerely, "Sage Zhang, if you didn't get rid of that traitor, Shang Teng, I'm afraid I would have died a long time ago. This cup is for you, I'll drink it first." Although Shang Teng captured him that day, he did not kill him. It was not because he had any good intentions, but because if the matter was exposed, he would have an additional bargaining chip in his hands. However, if the Lai Xian sect could successfully snatch the divine beast egg from Zhang Yan's hands, then there would be no need to keep him alive. It was not an exaggeration to say that his life was saved because of Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan smiled, "Daoist Huang, you're exaggerating. Daoist is blessed by the heavens, and you are not someone that can be harmed by thieves." Huang Zuoguang grinned and cupped his hands at Zhang Yan before sitting down. Duan Hanfeng stroked his beard and sighed, "It's not beautiful to have wine without music." Zhang Qianqiu's expression changed slightly. He glanced at Zhang Yan and smiled, "Why don't you watch the famous lotus leaf dance of my double moon peak?" Duan Hanfeng said happily, "This is exactly what I wanted." He turned to ask Zhang Yan, "What do you think, sage?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The guest should follow the host's wishes. Elder Duan can arrange it yourself." Duan Hanfeng chuckled. He pointed downwards, and beautiful lotus flowers climbed up from the pond in the middle of the hall. In an instant, a fragrant aroma filled the air, and the refreshing lotus leaves spread out over 10 feet. Every leaf was sparkling and translucent with dew, green and glistening. Then, he clapped his hands, and in the reverberation of the zither, 6 women covered in thin gauze walked into the hall. These women were all slender, with jade-like bones, icy thorns, cloud-like hair, and beautiful eyes. Not a single one of them wasn't beautiful. What was even rarer was that each of them had a clear qi cultivation. These 6 women stepped lightly on the lotus leaves that were less than 10 feet tall, and as light as swallows, they began to dance on the lotus leaves. Because of this, their bodies often intertwined, their lips and necks intertwined, their ears and temples rubbed against each other, and the scene was extremely erotic. Not only was the music intoxicating, but it also carried a hint of decadence. Duan Hanfeng watched as if he was intoxicated. Every time the 6 women reached a wonderful part of the dance, he would cheer loudly as if there was no one else around, but the other 5 elders didn't have any strange expressions, as if they were already used to it. Zhang Qianqiu had been observing Zhang Yan's expression from the side. At this time, he said, "Sage Zhang came to my central continent alone, and you don't even have anyone to serve you. I can make the decision to give these women to you. What does fellow Daoist think?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, but didn't express his opinion. Zhang Qianqiu observed his expression and saw that he didn't seem to have such an intention, so he didn't mention the matter anymore and turned to enjoy the lotus dance. After 3 rounds of wine, Zhang Qianqiu felt that the time was right. He wanted to bring up the matter of the token talisman, but he was afraid that if Zhang Yan refused, there would be no room for negotiation. Therefore, he gave Che Yi a few looks, hinting for him to speak and sound out Zhang Yan. However, Che Yi pretended to be deaf and mute, looking drowsy. Zhang Qianqiu was secretly annoyed by this. Ouyang Su saw his expression and couldn't help but shake his head. He put down the wine cup and asked directly, "Sage Zhang, Sage Cheng, do you have the restriction token talisman?" As soon as this question was asked, the hall fell silent, and everyone looked at Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan answered frankly, "Yes, it's in Ai's hands." Ouyang Su cupped his hands and said, "This item is crucial to our alliance. Could you please return it to us, Sage Zhang? Otherwise, we won't be able to sleep in peace." Zhang Qianqiu was a little anxious when he heard him speak so bluntly. He was afraid that Zhang Yan would turn against him out of anger. That would be troublesome. Zhang Yan chuckled and said, I am not a disciple of your alliance. I had planned to return this item long ago, but not now. Ouyang Su stared at him and asked in a low voice, when? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he said, Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan are currently refining an artifact for I. When the artifact is completed and I leave for the east, I will naturally return this item with both hands. He indeed had no intention of keeping this token for himself. When he returned to the Donghua continent, it would be useless even if he took it with him. However, he didn't feel at ease leaving an item that could threaten his life in the hands of others. It wouldn't be too late to take it out when he left. Although the 5 elders didn't get the token back, they felt much more relaxed after receiving a clear answer from Zhang Yan. They didn't need to worry anymore. This banquet was a joyous one for both the guests and the host. After the banquet, Zhang Yan left the main hall. He didn't go to the guest house to rest. Instead, he rode the wind out of the flying palace and went all the way to Luchi Mountain. He landed beside the earth-fire heavenly cauldron and found the place where he was before. He sat down cross-legged and continued to meditate every day, deducing techniques, and waiting for the artifact to be born. A month passed like this, and no one came to disturb him. One day, he suddenly heard a sound from the earth-fire heavenly cauldron. In front of the cave door, a white-haired and haggard-looking man walked out. He was Daoran. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and looked over. He couldn't help but be surprised. Why did you come out, fellow Daoran? Could it be that the statue has already been refined? Hua Xiaofang shook his head and said, to refine that statue, I'm afraid it will take another year. Zhang Yan took a closer look at him and raised his eyebrows. He seemed to have noticed something inside. I see. Hua Xiaofang smiled bitterly and said, Zhenren Zhang, you also saw it. Daoran has consumed too much essence and qi in the past few years. I'm afraid he's nearing the end of his life. Recently, he feels that he doesn't have much time left. Besides, Daoran has been away from the Golden Ling sect for a long time. It's time for him to go back and make arrangements for his funeral. Zhang Yan nodded. Chapter 469. Lu Qi Mountain, Earthfire Heavenly Cauldron. On top of a huge rock that was as smooth as a mirror, the strong cloud above Zhang Yan's head slowly rotated. In front of him, there was a dandelion that seemed to be moved by a pair of invisible hands. It was turning into lumps of dazzling crystal qi that floated up like smoke. Strands of it slowly merged into the strong cloud. After entering the state of yuanying, he no longer needed to use his mouth and nose to absorb qi. He could just use the strong cloud to refine Lingying. His cultivation speed was many times faster than before. When a cultivator entered the second level of yuanying and formed 3 dandelion on top of the strong cloud, he would be able to absorb even more qi of essence. By then, he would no longer be able to refine the scattered Lingying. He would have to go to the extreme heaven to refine the results. The Lingying in front of Zhang Yan was called White Sand Lingying. It was a gift from Zhenluo League. Although it was not as good as the Green Sun Lingying on Kunyu, it was still a top-grade one. It was not like the latter, which needed to be refined immediately after picking it up. As he was recuperating his spiritual vigor, he suddenly saw 2 rays of light coming from the blue sky. The first one was pure and white like a cloud. Under the sunlight, thin threads could be seen intertwining and forming the shape of a cloud raft. A black-haired Taoist sat on the raft in high spirits. Looking at his face, he was the elder of Zhenluo League, Ouyang Su. The person beside him who was riding the ray of light was the old acquaintance, Huang Zuoguang. Before he arrived, his laughter could be heard from afar. The 2 arrived on top of the heavenly cauldron in a flash. They pressed the cloud down and stood still. They greeted Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan returned the greeting with a smile. He waved his sleeve and took out a short black wooden table with pots and cups. It was exquisite and unique. There was a praying mat on the left and right. He extended his hand and said, this place is simple and crude. Please don't mind. The two of them said, "We don't dare to." After a few polite words, they cupped their hands and sat down peacefully. Zhang Yan sat down. He said with a smile, "Why aren't Taoist Ouyang and Taoist Huang cultivating in seclusion in the palace today? Why do you have the time to come to Ai's place?" Ouyang Su was a straightforward person, so he did not bother with pleasantries, so he went straight to the point. "I'm here today to thank you, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan was surprised. "What's the matter?" As for the matter of resisting Lai Xian sect. That day, the few elders had invited him to a banquet, but other than that, he couldn't think of anything else they wanted to thank him for. Huang Zuoguang solemnly said, "As I said before, if Taoist Zhang didn't make a move, I wouldn't have been able to escape. My life has long been in danger, so I have to repay this kindness." Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile and shake his head. He didn't take this matter to heart, but he didn't expect Huang Zuoguang to keep it in mind. At this moment, Ouyang Su said in a deep voice, "I heard that Sage Zhang is proficient in the art of flying swords." Zhang Yan did not know why the other party had brought this up. There must be a reason behind it, but there was nothing he couldn't admit, so he smiled and said, "I just know a thing or two. How did Taoist Ouyang know about it?" When he fought with the 7 Taoists of Lai Xian sect, he only used Taixian True Light and Purple Cloud Heavenly Lightning. He didn't really use the flying sword, so not many people had seen it. Even though he used the sword pellet after entering Middle Pillar Continent, Ouyang Su couldn't tell that he was proficient in it. Huang Zuoguang interrupted, "Senior brother Ouyang has a disciple called Yang Bingqing. He's also from Donghua Continent, but he admires Sage Zhang a lot. After he told me, I found out that Taoist Zhang used to sweep across Donghai with a sword, and you're an expert." Zhang Yan thought for a while. He seemed to have some impression of this person, so he said, "I see." Ouyang Su cupped his hands and said, "I won't hide it from Sage Zhang. Taoist Huang helped me when I was in danger, but I never had the chance to repay him. This time, you helped Taoist Huang escape, so I'm going to repay him." He took out 2 books and placed them on the table solemnly. He pushed them in front of Zhang Yan and said with a serious expression, "I know that Sage Zhang is from a big sect, so ordinary things probably won't enter your eyes. I heard that Taoist Zhang can control a flying sword, so I'm willing to offer this book to you. I don't know if it's useful to you, but if it's not to your liking, I'll go in exchange for it." Zhang Yan had been in Middle Pillar Continent for dozens of years, and after the battle with Lai Xian sect, he had some understanding of the techniques of the cultivators in this continent. Most of the cultivators here relied on magic treasures, and they didn't pay much attention to their own cultivation. Usually, the difference between cultivators was based on the magic treasures in their hands, so when he heard about the secret book, he didn't take it to heart. He wanted to keep it, but when he saw the name of the first book, his heart suddenly moved. He picked it up and flipped a few pages, but his gaze was fixed on it, and he couldn't move it away for a long time. After a while, his eyes flashed, and he said slowly, "Taoist Ouyang is thoughtful, I will accept this." Huang Zuoguang saw that he didn't refuse, and he unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. Actually, he did want to repay Zhang Yan, but it wasn't to the point of tears. He just wanted to find an excuse for what he did today. The elders of Zhenluo Union were still worried about the formation talisman, so they specially searched the union and found this thing. They ordered him to give it to Zhang Yan, so that he could return the favor. It was also because they knew that Zhang Yan's fighting ability was tyrannical, and now that he had a fierce reputation, they couldn't help but be afraid of him. If it was someone else here, the elders of Zhenluo Union wouldn't give them any face, and they would have already tried to snatch it. In order to cater to his interest, they first found Yang Bingqing, and then spent half a month searching everywhere for these 2 books. Because no one in the Central Pillar State was good at the sword path, many of them were scattered, and after comparing them with many other incomplete books, they were able to complete the 2 books. Ouyang Su didn't care about the Tao. Seeing that Zhang Yan had accepted it, he felt that there was nothing else to do, so he didn't want to stay any longer. He immediately stood up and cupped his hands. "Since Taoist Ouyang is satisfied, we won't disturb your cultivation anymore. We'll take our leave now. Huang Zuoguang wanted to say a few more words and point out that it wasn't easy to obtain this thing, but when Ouyang Su stood up, he grinned and could only bitterly stand up, saying goodbye. Zhang Yan stood up and looked at Huang Zuoguang meaningfully. He smiled and said, Daoist Ouyang, Daoist Huang, please thank the elders of your union on I's behalf. Huang Zuoguang saw Zhang Yan looking at him with a smile that wasn't a smile, and he knew that he had seen through the trick. He couldn't help but blush, lowered his head, and hurriedly cupped his hands. Then, he cast a spell and flew back to Twin Moon Peak with Ouyang Su. After watching the two leave, Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and sat back down. His eyes shone with a strange light as he picked up the book and flipped it open. He didn't expect that this book wasn't a divine technique from the Central Pillar State, but a sword cultivation secret book from the Shaoqing sect. 500 years ago, the Shaoqing sect had a great battle with the Central Pillar State, and they lost dozens of disciples, causing many secret books to be left behind. The Shaoqing sect wasn't afraid of their secret books leaking out, and the ones that were spread out weren't too profound, so they didn't come to ask for it. After roughly reading through the book, he slowly closed the book. He felt that a skylight had been opened in front of him. There were many doubts in his mind, but now, they were all cleared up. He thought to himself, ever since I achieved Yuanying, the star's sword pellet isn't as sharp as it used to be. I was wondering why, so it's because of this. Along his path of cultivation, the path of slaying with the flying sword was a great reliance for him. However, as his cultivation progressed, the sword pellet showed signs of fatigue. He originally thought that it was because he didn't inherit a high-grade sword technique, but after reading this book, he finally understood the reason. Although the sword pellet was divided into upper and lower levels, it required a Yuanying Zhenren to refine it at the very least. When the sword bearers obtained this treasure, their cultivation wasn't high. When their cultivation increased day by day until it caught up to the cultivation of the sword bearers, according to the Shaoqing secret book, the sword pellet would have the saying of removing clothes. His star's sword pellet was refined by Elder Sun in the sect, and its divine art was very different from his. When his mind and magic power flowed, it couldn't be smooth. When his cultivation was low, he didn't feel anything, but now that his magic power had increased greatly, it was slightly obstructed. It was like suddenly barging into a house built by someone else. There would always be some parts that he wasn't used to, as if there was a layer of obstruction. Thus, when a sword cultivation reached this step, he had to refine the sword pellet once again, so that it could fuse with his mind and magic power, as if they were one. The secret book in his hands talked about how to refine the sword pellet again. If this book landed in the hands of a cultivator who didn't know the flying sword Dao, it would really be worthless. But in Zhang Yan's hands, it was different. Now that his divine ability and cultivation technique had just been mastered, and he had a complete set of magical treasures, he lacked a sharp weapon of slaughter. If he could seize this opportunity to refine this sword orb once more, he might be able to revive his sword's might and display the brilliance of that day. He couldn't help but feel emotional. After coming to the Middle Pillar State for dozens of years, his gains today were only second to the Yuanying realm that day. He closed his eyes and thought for a while. Then, he opened the book and flipped through it carefully. To refine the sword pellet again, other than the cultivation method, he also needed many precious materials. A cauldron was also a must. Calculating, the required materials weren't few, and there were many that were extremely rare. Luckily, this was the Middle Pillar State, and it was rich in resources. It could be said to be the best in the 9 regions. The things mentioned in the secret book could be found, but it would take some effort. His eyes flashed, and he had already made up his mind. When the Yi statue was refined, he would start to refine the sword pellet. After putting down the book, he suddenly remembered that Ouyang Su had sent him 2 books, and he didn't know what was written in the second book. However, when he picked it up and took a look, he couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. With one look, he knew that this book was gathered from various places and forcefully put together. Among them, it talked about unorthodox methods, the scattered sword techniques of various sections. As for the so-called sword, it wasn't a sword pellet, but a magical sword. Looking through it row by row, all sorts of strange techniques were listed on it, and there was no lack of fantastic ideas. Even Elder Yi Jiliu of the Xian sect's path of sword refinement was mentioned. However, most of the cultivation methods indicated at the end were unorthodox methods. As for the more advanced ones, they were only a few words and were briefly mentioned. If a wandering cultivator got this book, they might treat it like a treasure, but to a cultivator like him who came from an orthodox sect, it was just a novelty. He flipped through it calmly, but when he reached the last page, his eyes lit up and he couldn't help but sit up straight. Struggle for the Great Tao text. Welcome readers to log in, read the full text. Chapter 470. Zhang Yan flipped to the last page of the book and noticed that the words, Shaoqing 3 lineages, were reflected in his eyes. Even he couldn't help but feel a little excited. But after a moment of excitement, his expression returned to calmness. The other secret techniques were fine as they might not be leaked, but this 3-lineage sword technique was the most important secret technique of Shaoqing sect. It was impossible for the Zhenluo alliance to learn of it so easily. Taking a step back, even if they got it, would they dare to give it to him? Also, how could this 3-lineage sword technique be completely recorded on a single page? Although Shaoqing sect focused on sword cultivation, it was a 10,000-year-old sect that was no weaker than Qinsang school. They naturally had many different sword cultivation techniques. But if one looked at the big picture, there were actually only 3 lineages. They were the Killing Sword, Extreme Sword, and Sword of Transformation. That day on Yaoyin Mountain, the Shaoqing sect disciple Kang Tong walked the Killing Sword lineage. This technique was full of ferocity and specialized in the path of attack. It focused on one sword swing, cutting through everything. Magic treasures, spirit artifacts, techniques, they were all subjects of my sword. The extreme sword lineage used the sword escape technique to the extreme. If one trained it to the Mahayana realm, when the sword flew, it would be like a meteor breaking through the sky, traveling as fast as lightning. In an instant, it would be able to roam the world and step into the universe. Even if the cultivators of this lineage could not defeat their opponent in a fight, they could still safely escape. They were extremely difficult to deal with. As for the Sword of Transformation lineage, when trained to a high level, it could turn into billions of sword lights and trillions of starlight. It could also merge thousands of techniques and evolve endless wondrous effects. But among the 3 lineages, this path was also the most complicated. It was the hardest to master. The disciples of Shaoqing sect relied on this 3-lineage sword technique to dominate the world and become the #1 sect in Donghua continent. Zhang Yan thought that even though he had the sword pill in his hands, Yucang's sect did not have such superior swordsmanship passed down after all. If there was a chance in the future, he might as well pay a visit to Shaoqing sect. If he could learn a spell, his talent in the path of the sword would not be in vain. However, it was too early to think about this. He looked down. Flipping the book further down, as expected, this page didn't contain any techniques. Instead, it was an account of the lives of the 3 powerful elders of the Shaoqing sect. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. He could also understand the intention of the person who wrote this book. The front of this book was filled with random and unorthodox techniques. It seemed very unorthodox, and the Shaoqing sect was also added in. That was to raise his status. He thought for a moment. Although these books were useless, he could at least show them to his disciples if he brought them back. Thus, he casually put the 2 books into his sleeve. With a wave of his sleeve, he put away the table in front of him and closed his eyes to meditate. Half a month passed by in the blink of an eye, and soon it was the 10th month of early winter. At this time, the water was cold, and the branches were dry. The whole mountain was cold. However, at this moment, the earthly fire heavenly cauldron was filled with raging flames. Cauldron smoke filled the air and heat waves surged. It was very different from the outside world. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan were nervously looking at the stone pit. 2 months had passed, but there was no movement from the Iya god statue. However, they didn't dare to let down their guard. One must know that it wasn't a dead object, and it definitely wouldn't be willing to be refined just like that. However, to refine this statue into a magical treasure, they also needed to mix in some materials, and halfway through, they had to open the door of the cauldron. This was the most dangerous moment. The statue might explode and resist at this moment, which was why they borrowed the earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf from Zhang Yan to guard the door of the cauldron and prevent it from charging out. Liang Changgong held the heaven and earth leaf in his hand, his expression was slightly nervous. After all, the statue was equivalent to a grade 3 Yuanying Zhenren. With a raise of its hand, the mountains would shake. Even if a large half of its essence energy and spiritual power were used up, it wasn't something they could block. The two of them carefully observed for a while, and when they felt that the time was right, they nodded at each other, indicating that they could open the cauldron. Wei Shudan took out a yellow flag from behind him, holding it with both hands, he waved it. Suddenly, dozens of stones beside the pit flew up. In an instant, it was like a gate had been opened, and steam rolled out and surged over. At the same time, Liang Changgong cast the heaven and earth leaf in his hand into the air. The golden leaf spread out and floated in front of him. Immediately, 100 feet wide golden curtain hung down, blocking the path of the cauldron. Even though the statue of Iya was suppressed, he had obtained the remnant soul of Iya, and he knew a bit about crafting artifacts. He knew that if the two of them wanted to refine it into a treasure, they would have to put in materials. At that time, they would have to open the door of the cauldron, and that would be his chance. Thus, in these 2 months, even though a lot of his essence energy was used up, he had been gritting his teeth and not moving, enduring bitterly. At this moment, he suddenly saw that the cauldron door was wide open, and the path to escape was right in front of him. How could he hesitate for even a moment? He immediately circulated the mana in his body and used his escape technique. A black escape light rose into the air and charged out. However, just as he charged forward, he saw a curtain of golden light blocking the door of the cauldron, blocking his path. It was already too late to make a move, but at this point, how could he retreat? He snorted, and relying on the body of the artifact, he rammed into it. A loud sound rang out, and only waves of rumbling could be heard. Even the gravel on the ground of the furnace cave jumped slightly. The world leaf swayed repeatedly, and the golden light it emitted continuously rippled like water, as if it had suffered an extremely ferocious charge. Liang Changgong felt his chest tighten, and he said in shock, "How can this thing have such strong mana?" Wei Shudan saw him like this and frowned. He quickly formed a spell and said, "Dao brother, don't panic, I'll help you." Liang Changgong nodded. The two of them activated their magic power together and poured it into the heaven and earth leaf. This magic treasure suddenly trembled, and on the body of the leaf, rays of golden light shot out. It was so dazzling that it forced one's eyes to be blinded. However, they weren't the original owner of the heaven and earth leaf, so they could only use such a shallow method to control the treasure. They weren't like Zhang Yan, who didn't need to use much mana to unleash the treasure's power to the extreme. The statue of Iya kept charging, but it couldn't break through the golden barrier set by the heaven and earth leaf. It couldn't help but be furious. If it was at its peak, how could a mere profound artifact stop it? With a roar, it waved its sleeves without caring about the consumption of its chi. For a moment, lightning rained down, shaking the heaven and earth leaf. The golden barrier gradually shrunk, and after the time it took to eat a meal, it had shrunk from the original 100 feet to 50 to 60 feet. Seeing such a situation, Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan's foreheads were covered in sweat. Right now, they were already using all their strength, but they still couldn't stop the statue, not to mention taking time to put in the precious material. The two of them couldn't help but regret. If it wasn't because they were worried that the separation and reunion refined fire in the statue would be contaminated by the furnace fire and destroy a rare precious material, they wouldn't have opened the furnace so early. If they were 10 days later, the item's essence would have been completely used up, and they wouldn't have to work so hard. They were complaining in their hearts, the statue of Iya wasn't having a good time either. One must know that the furnace fire in the pit hadn't been extinguished, and was still licking at his body. Without the protection of mana, he already felt like he couldn't hold on much longer. Just as he was fretting, he suddenly felt a hint of something outside of Mount Chi Deer that seemed to be resonating with him. He couldn't help but be startled. He knew there must be a reason, and silently examined it. He couldn't help but be delighted, and thought to himself, so it's still nearby. If I can use it to activate the golden bridge, I should be able to escape. Once the door of the furnace opened, he actually felt the location of the statue outside of Mount Chi Deer. But this item was too far away. If it was before, they would be able to sense each other and activate their supernatural powers. But now that he was trapped for 2 months, his essence was greatly depleted, he needed to slowly guide the Tao to have a chance of success. Right now, he couldn't care too much, he had this life-saving straw, how could he let it go? He pretended to attack while channeling his mana, wanting to guide the item to fly over. At this moment beside the heavenly cauldron, Zhang Yan suddenly felt something, his eyes opened wide, and he woke up from his meditation. He frowned slightly. Just now, he suddenly felt a disturbance in his spiritual opportunity, as if there was a cultivator casting a spell nearby. Other than him, there was only Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan. He waved his sleeves, stood up, and walked to the side of the heavenly cauldron. Looking down, the deep pit seemed to be boiling, there was the sound of water boiling, the smoke spread out, and gradually covered the high slope, it was a blur. Zhang Yan had seen the refining of a treasure once, he knew that this was the sign of opening the door of the furnace. But seeing that the door did not close for a long time, he couldn't help but think, when Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan went down, they said that if the refining was successful, it would take at least half a year, at most a year, and they would almost be able to refine the statue. But now it has only been 2 months, it is impossible to succeed, something must have happened. He stood still, and used his mind to communicate with the Qian Kun leaf. After a while, a ray of light flashed across his eyes, he snorted coldly, raised his hand, and a ray of spiritual light flew out. In a flash, it entered the pit, and after a few hundred feet, it found the location of the Qian Kun leaf and rushed over. In just a short while, it was already in front of the Qian Kun leaf. The spiritual light suddenly shot over, and in the blink of an eye, it merged into the body of the treasure. With the help of Zhang Yan, the power of the Qian Kun leaf instantly increased, and the golden light shone brightly. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan suddenly felt the pressure on them decrease, and seeing the strange state of the Qian Kun leaf, they guessed that it was Zhang Yan who made the move, and couldn't help but be overjoyed. Wei Shudan hurriedly shouted, Liang Changgong, let us quickly throw the precious materials in, and then quickly close the door of the furnace. Liang Changgong responded, and with a scoop of his hand, he pulled up the banner behind him, and waved it repeatedly. The precious materials that were prepared beforehand were swept up by a gust of wind, and thrown into the door of the furnace. At this time, the advantage of the Qian Kun leaf could be seen. Although it blocked the statue of Iya, the precious materials passed through it without any hindrance. The statue of Iya suddenly saw the change in the Qian Kun leaf, and how could it not know what was going on? It got up madly, and charged forward. Just now, its essence and qi were already exhausted, and just now, after a series of blind movements, it was already like a lamp that had run out of oil, and its momentum was gradually declining. Liang Changgong felt its change, and his spirit was roused. He said, Wei Shudan, quickly stabilize the door of the furnace, don't let him escape again. The two of them raised the banner together, and waved it with all their might, and shouted together, seal. With a rumble, countless cave stones flew over, and closed the door of the furnace once again. And that Qian Kun leaf swayed, and also retracted its spiritual light. It fell from the sky, and returned to Liang Changgong's hand. Exhaustion appeared on the faces of the two of them. What they did just now was no less than a fierce battle with someone. However, they also knew that the most dangerous hurdle was safely passed with Zhang Yan's help, and from now on, there was no longer any obstruction. Chapter 471. After suppressing Yiya's statue of deity, it was peaceful for the next 40-odd days. There were no more disturbances. It was already the end of the 12th month of the year. On the 9th day of the month, from the furnace of earth fire came the sound of an urn being struck. The rocks on Mount Luchi shook. In the crevices, sand and gravel fell continuously. The smoke from the furnace overflowed, instantly filling up the 1,000-foot-wide hole. Not long after, there was a sound, like a flock of birds moving to their nests, chirping. A few days ago, Zhang Yan saw that it was time to open the treasures. He was afraid that something might go wrong, so he did not circulate his energy, he only watched from the side. Suddenly a golden light flew out from below, heading straight for him. This was the earth-splitting Qian Kun leaf that Liang and Wei exchanged for. Zhang Yan rolled up his sleeves and kept this treasure. After waiting for about 10 breaths of time, a loud noise suddenly sounded in his ears. It was like a thunderclap from a clear sky. More than 10 rays of multicolored light flew out like rainbows and soared into the air. They were all wrapped in spiritual energy and emitted half a foot of multicolored light. It was exceptionally gorgeous. Zhang Yan waved his hand and a treasure came to him. He held it horizontally in front of him. It was a pair of golden whips, 5 feet long, the handle thick, tight in the hand. It could be separated or closed. The whip body had a total of 24 sections, forming an octagonal shape. With a slight shake, there was the sound of wind and thunder. With a surge of mana, the 2 whips leapt into the air. One had wind and clouds swirling, the other had lightning winding around it. He praised, "What a good whip of wind and thunder." After thinking for a while, he stretched out his hand again and caught another treasure. He wiped away the light on it. It revealed its true appearance. It was a small flag. The surface was indigo blue. When he touched it, it was smooth like satin. The patterns were like dancing birds and beasts. It was mysterious. There were bright yellow tassels on the edge. When he picked it up and shook it, it rippled out magnificent clouds. It traveled 100 feet. Just now, it slowly disappeared. It could be seen that it should be a defensive weapon. He secretly nodded. These 2 treasures were not ordinary. He raised his head to look. Although the treasures in the air were all colorful, there was nothing special. Only one of the balls of light was shining brighter and brighter. It was very eye-catching. He was very different from the others, so he raised his hand and also summoned it. Picking it up to take a look, he saw that the treasure was an ancient snake-shaped candle. It was copper in color, about half a chi tall, and was supported by a coiled snake. The snake's mouth was wide open, spitting out a tongue. There was a bean-sized flame on it, flickering and extinguishing. He blew out a breath of fresh air. Not only did the fire not extinguish, it suddenly rose several inches and sprinkled down a soft light like water. The ground was full of illusions, as if several flood serpents were crawling in it. This treasure was so strange that he couldn't figure out what was so special about it, so he put it aside. He inspected the remaining magic treasures one by one, only to discover that they were all spirit weapons. He couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart. After all, the precious material used to forge these magic treasures was the Yiya statue. Why didn't any of them become profound-level weapons? Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan had already finished forging the treasures. They had already walked out of the furnace. They saw that Zhang Yan was inspecting the magic treasures, so they stood at the side, not daring to disturb him. At this moment, seeing that he was confused, Liang Changgong came up and cupped his hands, saying, "Jinren, please don't be suspicious. These magic treasures are all high-grade spirit weapons, but because of their rich foundation, if we can find a master who is fated with the magic treasures to nurture them, there is a possibility of them becoming profound-level weapons." Wei Shudan was afraid that Zhang Yan would think that the 2 of them didn't put in their best effort, so she hurriedly agreed. In their entire lives, they had only successfully forged 2 profound-level weapons. Zhang Yan's earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf was the second one. It was basically something that could only be found, not sought. This magic treasure that was forged by the Lai Xian sect's founder's statue was actually a common one, but it wasn't easy to give birth to true consciousness. It just had a higher chance than other magic treasures. Zhang Yan nodded his head. He was originally prepared to bring these magic treasures to his sect's disciples. If it didn't work, there was no need to force it, so he said, I said earlier that if there are magic treasures, each of you can choose one. Out of these 12 magic treasures, the 2 of you can take whichever one suits you. The 2 of them were perceptive. Seeing that Zhang Yan had just now chosen a few, he seemed to have his eyes set on the wind thunder whip and the blue brocade flag, so they purposely left them out. Liang Changgong didn't look at it for long. He took a small silver furnace over. The moment he held it in his arms, he felt warm, his whole body relaxed, and his spirit was lifted up a little. He had forged many magic treasures in his life, but none of them were as compatible with him as this small furnace. His face couldn't help but reveal a look of fondness. Wei Shudan, on the other hand, took a white ivory folding fan in her hand. Once she opened the ribs of the fan, a fragrant smell assailed his nostrils. The auspicious light spread out several feet. The plum blossoms, orchids, bamboo and chrysanthemums appeared on the surface of the fan, each looking cold and aloof, but it didn't seem extraordinary. He frowned, flipped the fan over and looked at it a few more times. His heart was slightly moved. A hint of joy suddenly appeared in his eyes. He closed the fan and quietly hid it in his sleeve. Since Zhang Yan had promised the 2 of them to choose one treasure, he wouldn't care what the mystery was. With a wave of his sleeve, he kept the rest of the magic treasures. Then with a shake of his hand, he threw 2 jade boxes over and said, the 2 of you have worked hard for many years this is the reward for refining the magic treasures. Liang Changgong waved his hand. Since we have been bestowed treasures by Jinren Zhang, how would we dare to accept rewards? It's not appropriate, not appropriate. Wei Shudan, on the other hand, waved his hand and took the 2 jade boxes over. He gave Liang Changgong a look and said, since it's given by Jinren Zhang, Dao brother Liang, will accept it. Even though he hadn't spent much time with Zhang Yan, he could see that he wasn't just being polite. These few years, he had been refining treasures, and he hadn't slacked off in the slightest, so he could accept some rewards. Zhang Yan said with a smile, Dao friend Liang, you don't have to be in a hurry to decline, I still have something to trouble the 2 of you with. Seeing this, Liang Changgong could only accept it. He cupped his hands again and said, Jinren, feel free to tell us what you need. Zhang Yan told them about how he needed to refine the sword pellet, and in the end, he said, in the path of refining, the 2 of you can be considered experts. It's just that this sword pellet isn't ordinary, and the precious materials it needs are harsh and rare. I'm only a passerby in this continent after all, so I'm afraid it'll be hard to gather everything in a short time, so I'll need the 2 of you to help me with this. Liang Changgong said with a smile, this matter is easy. I'll call a steward from my sect to listen to Jinren Zhang's orders another day. If you need anything, feel free to tell him to do it. Wei Shudan nodded. If Jinren Zhang needs anything else, just get someone to let me know. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, then I'll have to trouble you with this matter. The 2 of them returned the greeting and said, we don't deserve it. The 2 of them had already left the residence for several years, and seeing that there wasn't anything important left, they bade farewell and left. They didn't dare to delay Zhang Yan's matter, so in just 3 days, they had delivered all the things they needed. Zhang Yan checked and found that nothing was left out, so he waved his sleeves and kept everything. He sat silently for a night, and on the second morning, he saw that the time for sacrificial refining had arrived, so he flew into the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Inside the heavenly furnace, there were a total of 365 caves. Previously, when Liang and Wei Shudan were refining the treasure, they chose the southern position to borrow the power of the fire, so they only used a dozen caves. However, when Zhang Yan sacrificial refined the sword pellet, he didn't care about the position, but he needed to get an item. He soared into the sky and stepped on a cloud, heading straight to the center. To refine the sword pellet, he needed to return this treasure to its original path, completely erasing the trace left behind by the previous sword refiner, so that it would be in harmony with his own mind, becoming one with it, without any flaws. If he was still a core formation cultivator, he would never be able to do this. Because of that, the treasure was in harmony with his mind, only he knew where it needed to go, where it needed to be cleaned, so even if he asked the elders to help, it wouldn't be safe. If he took a wrong step, not only would the sword pellet be useless, but he would also be injured. Not long after, Zhang Yan arrived at the center of the heavenly furnace. He looked left and right, found a big rock at a high place, and landed on it, then took out the restriction talisman. With this item in hand, he didn't need to use banners to move the rocks like Liang and Wei Shudan. Holding it in his hand, he used his mana, and the rocks flew up like locusts, instantly revealing the underground cavern in the furnace. He took a look inside and saw that it was bottomless, and the edges were charred black. This place led to the fire lung of the earth vein. Once the rock was opened, the chi of earth fire gushed out, and even he felt the heat was unbearable. Immediately, he had a thought, and the treasured clothes on his body shone brightly, illuminating 3 feet and forcing the heat away. He sat on the big rock and called out the star's sword pellet. According to the sword refining method, he first calmed the sword pellet, then waved the talisman in his hand, and softly chanted a spell. Not long after, the talisman trembled slightly, and it gave off rays of light. Zhang Yan saw that he was on the right path, so he didn't stop and chanted continuously. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, a ball of red and blue spiritual fire flew out from the bottom of the furnace. It was the size of a palm, and the flames flickered. It circled in the air, but it refused to land. Seeing this item, Zhang Yan's gaze focused on it, and his expression was solemn. He bit the tip of his tongue, and spat out a mouthful of blood, which flew several feet and hit the fire. This ball of spiritual fire immediately let out a sizzling sound, and the blue and red color changed a few times. After a moment, a faint purple color appeared, and it stopped moving, as if it had calmed down. Zhang Yan stretched out a finger, and the fire fell obediently, stopping on the tip of his finger. Even though the flame was burning and flashing, it didn't feel hot at all. He couldn't help but smile. The furnace fire needed to refine the sword pellet was unique, and it wasn't the fire in front of him, but a trace of Kunyang real fire that was buried deep in the ground. Even in such a huge heavenly furnace of earth fire, there were only 4 true fires, and they were found by the 2 heavenly abode people after much effort. Every time the true fire was used, there would be 1 less, but as long as the fire seed was still there, it could be reborn after 100 years. If he didn't have the Double Moon Peak's restrictive formation talisman, he would have to pay a big price to borrow the fire. He waved his sleeves, and the precious materials that he brought from the ground were spread out, piling up like a small hill. Then, he raised his hand and pointed, and the fire flew out. When it reached the precious materials, it circled around them, and instantly melted like wax. In the end, there were only a few crystal sand, and after another circle, it turned into a clear air. He urged his mind, and the star's sword pellet was already suspended in front of him. He operated his mana slightly, and the clear air was drawn into the sword aperture. When the air was completely absorbed, the sword pellet let out a clear sound, and with a flash of brilliance, it fell into the space between his eyebrows. The method of sacrificing the sword in the Taoist book was very strange, and it needed to be sacrificed in the aperture of the human body, so that it wouldn't be contaminated by the external impurities. This method wasn't complicated, and he had already memorized it. He only needed to sacrifice the sword according to the instructions in the book, so he closed his eyes, and used his mind to catch the sword pellet, and then he operated the method. Struggle for the Great Way at text. Welcome readers to log in read the full text. Chapter 472. Zhang Yan was refining the sword pellet in his acupoints. Under his full concentration, he did not notice the passing of time. After an unknown amount of time, on this day, he suddenly felt a throbbing in his mind and woke up from his meditative state. He slowly opened his eyes and looked outside. At this moment, he was still sitting in the crater of earth fire, surrounded by high piles of stones, facing the crater. The heat was pressing in, luckily he had the protection of the treasured shirt, the fire poison could not invade him. But because of this, no one would disturb him, it was better than finding another cave. He silently inspected his body, the star's sword pellet was sitting steadily in his acupoint, a turbid chi was pouring in. With a light push, it rolled back and forth, like lead mercury flowing, giving off a feeling of stagnation. Then, he released a clear qi into it, and it became as light as a feather, floating in the air. After he refined it again, this sword pellet was already very different from before. Looking at it carefully, it was like a crystal pearl, clear and exquisite, about the size of a baby's fist, pure and flawless. The spiritual energy was pressing, like a newborn. This sword pellet was originally of the water attribute. Now that it had gone through the true fire of earth and earth, it had been washed clean, returning to its original appearance. Zhang Yan lightly shouted and used his escape technique, turning into a ray of golden escape light and leaving the furnace. After rushing out for a few miles, he circled around Mount Deer Chi and stood on a high cliff. With a push of his mind, he heard a clear sword hum, like the roar of a dragon or tiger, and a clear light rushed out from between his brows, shooting straight into the clouds. Not long after, a long crack appeared above the cloud layer. This was caused when the sword pellet pierced through it and slashed it along the way. Zhang Yan called out in his mind. A light flashed before his eyes, and when he looked again, the star's sword pellet had actually landed in his palm without a sound. He took a breath, and his divine sense probed inside, without any obstruction, as if this item had become one with him. He used his mana again, and the sword pellet trembled back and forth, giving off waves of hum. At first, it was very weak, but as his mana increased, that sound became louder and louder. In the end, it became a howl that shook the heavens, like thunder and drums. Not only that, the treasure kept jumping, as if it would fly out of his hand if he was not careful. It soared into the clouds. Zhang Yan was delighted when he saw this. With another thought, the sword pellet flew into the air again and was less than half a foot away from his palm. It flew around according to his will and was even more agile than before. He noticed. When the sword light flashed, it wasn't as sharp as before. Instead, it was faint and illusory, and it was difficult to notice unless one looked carefully. He thought about it. He decided to test the sharpness of the sword. After rummaging around, he took out a magic sword from his bag. He circulated his magic power and tossed it into the air before raising his sword pellet to slash. A faint shadow flashed past, and after a soft sound, the magic sword was cut into two as if it was a piece of rotten wood. His eyes were filled with joy and satisfaction as he said, "Good," to himself. This magic sword was taken out from the sleeve of an elder of the Lai Xian sect. It could be considered a spiritual weapon, but it couldn't even withstand the slash of the sword ball that he refined. It could be seen that not only was the sword not damaged at all. Instead, it became much sharper. He was prepared to try the light-splitting shadow transformation technique, but at that moment, the sword pellet that was originally floating in the air suddenly buzzed, as if it had noticed something weird. Zhang Yan felt that it was in a hurry to leave. Looking at it, it seemed to want to go somewhere. He raised his brows and decided to let go of the restraints. Once the gate was opened, the sword pellet was like a wild horse that broke free from its reins, flying like lightning. When it was a few miles away, the sword light dropped down and burrowed into the ground. In just a short while, there was a shrill cry as if it had cut something. This sword pellet had Zhang Yan's mind, and everywhere it passed, everything was clear. Like looking at palm lines, he looked carefully and found out everything. His face was filled with shock. At the foot of the mountain, there was actually a statue of the Iya god Venerable. Apart from that, there was actually an original spirit hidden within. Just now, when the flying sword was in the air, it felt an undetectable trace of hostility, so it didn't hesitate to kill it. With that slash, not only did it break the statue, but even the original spirit was completely destroyed. Zhang Yan thought back. Apart from Gong Yangsheng, the rest of the people in the Lai Xian sect, including Shang Teng, were all personally killed by him. There was no way for them to escape. Only when he activated the restriction formation to trap the statue did he fail to notice it, allowing it to escape. That person was most likely Gong Yangsheng. It was also this great elder's bad luck. If Zhenluo Union hadn't given him the Tao book, Zhang Yan would have left long ago after obtaining the magic treasure. He wouldn't have stayed here for so long, and he wouldn't have refined the sword pellet here. Coincidentally, he just happened to kill him. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and called the star's sword pellet back. He noticed that when it flew back and forth just now, it was as fast as lightning. It was even faster than before, so he knew that his efforts weren't in vain. At that moment, he couldn't help but feel excited. He flicked the sword pellet and it split apart, instantly turning into 2 streaks of sword light. With a shake, it split into 2 and continued to split like that until there were 16 streaks of sword light. Just now, it stopped. At that moment, Zhang Yan had a thought that he couldn't stop. He felt that if he continued to activate it, he could split it even more. However, just as he was about to do it, a feeling of exhaustion appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but shiver and stop his actions. This wasn't because he was tired. His core was at the 1st grade and his foundation was deep. He had a lot of energy, so he wouldn't be so tired. The feeling just now came from his true consciousness. The sword pellet couldn't take it anymore. He thought about it and found the reason. Although the sword pellet seemed to have been reborn and was reborn, the true consciousness had shrunk a little. That was because after it was refined, even though the impurities were removed, a layer of true essence had been shaved off. It needed to be nurtured well before it could recover. He believed that when the time came, not only would it regain its former appearance, it would also become much stronger. He smiled and couldn't help but feel high-spirited. With this treasure, he could compete with the disciples of the other sects during the sword competition of the 16 sects. He placed his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. Since the sword was refined, he just needed to return the token to Zhenluo Alliance and it would be time for him to leave. With a grunt, the sword pellet jumped and turned into a streak of light, disappearing into the space between his eyebrows. He got up and leaped. He rode the wind towards Feiyu Daoist Palace. Luqi Mountain and Daoist Palace were less than 500 miles apart. He arrived in no time. After the battle with Lai Xian sect, Zhenluo Alliance learned their lesson. Feiyu Daoist Palace's security was much tighter than before. Even the Double Moon Peak's formation was guarded at all times. At the moment, there were at least 5 Yuanying Jinren guarding the peak. In the central pillar state, unless Ping Dong's Qingshi Temple and Jinling sect joined forces to attack, no one could make things difficult for them. The disciples on duty had been warned beforehand that if they saw an esteemed guest coming from Luqi Mountain, they must not be offended. He definitely couldn't offend him. He had to let him in immediately. The child at the door saw a cloud coming from that direction and remembered the elder's instructions. He hurriedly opened the formation and let him in. Zhang Yan rode the cloud slowly inside. This was Zhenluo Alliance's Daoist Palace. Even though there were no rules prohibiting flying, it was still a place for others to cultivate. It would be inappropriate to fly recklessly. Thus, he pressed the cloud down until it was 3 feet above the ground. He asked the child, "Is Elder Huang in the palace?" The Daoist child lowered his head in fear and said, "Reporting to this Daoist, the elders are in the main hall discussing matters." Zhang Yan thought for a moment. Perhaps the elders had something important to discuss. He nodded and asked casually, "When will he come out?" The Daoist child scratched his head and said, "I don't know." Zhang Yan laughed and waved his hand, "It's I who made things difficult for you. It's fine. Go, I'll wait here." He planned to leave after returning the token. He didn't plan to stay for long. This item was too important. He had to personally hand it over to one of the Zhenluo Alliance's elders. Huang Zuoguang had given him 2 Daoist books. Thus, he decided to sell this favor to this person. He looked around and saw an elegant pavilion not far from the front of the hall. He urged the cloud over and sat down in the pavilion. He closed his eyes and waited there patiently. The Daoist child saw him leave and took a few glances. He didn't think too much and returned to stand in front of the Daoist palace. Due to the incident with Shang Teng, the original reception boys had been changed. They only sought stability and didn't care about being quick-witted. This Taoist child had just arrived and was an honest person. If it was someone with the slightest bit of insight, they would arrange for Zhang Yan to rest in a guest house or serve him fragrant tea. No one dared to let him sit there and wait. However, the Taoist child was ignorant and didn't understand any of this. After an hour, the bell outside suddenly rang. Dozens of maids rushed out from the main hall and lined up on both sides of the palace gate. They seemed to be welcoming some important guests. Zhang Yan was also startled and couldn't help but look over curiously. Not long after, 3 people came in from outside the Taoist palace. The Taoist walking at the front had a fair face and no facial hair. He wore embroidered clothes and a golden crown. 2 apricot yellow ribbons hung down from his temples with a jade pendant at the end. This person's eyebrows were arched and his eyes were slightly protruding. He had a burly figure and thick joints on his hands and feet. The cloud on top of his head was actually black like a ball of thick ink. He looked extremely ferocious. Behind him were 2 handsome youths with slender waists and long legs. Their eyebrows reached their temples and their skin was white as if they were powdered. They stood with swords in their hands. The Taoist saw the maids in front of him and couldn't help but snort coldly as if he was dissatisfied. A youth behind him on the left immediately stood up and said loudly, "Zhenluo Alliance is so rude. My Jinling sect sent an envoy here and no one came to welcome us." His voice was loud and spread far and wide. It even startled many rare birds on the roof. But after a while, not a single elder came out from the main hall. The youth was instantly dissatisfied and was about to speak again when the Taoist turned his gaze and found Zhang Yan sitting in the pavilion. He stretched out his hand to stop his disciple from speaking and walked towards the pavilion. When he arrived in front of Zhang Yan, he said arrogantly, "Which elder of Zhenluo Alliance are you? Why are you sitting here? You don't even greet me when you see me. Is this how you treat your guests?" Zhang Yan slowly opened his eyes and looked at him. He said lightly, "I am not an elder of Zhenluo Alliance. If you want to find someone, you can go to the main hall." The Taoist was not willing to believe him. He lifted his hem and sat opposite him. He sneered, "Don't think that once Lai Xian order is gone, you can look down on Jinling sect. Jinren Cheng is no longer here. What else do you have to rely on?" When Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes flickered and he said in a low voice, "Oh? I wonder where Jinren Cheng is now." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. M. Chapter 473. Since the defeat of Gong Yangsheng and the others, the Zhenluo League had completely uprooted their forces in Pingxi. Without a group of Yuanying elders, the Lai Xian sect was powerless to resist. The loyal followers were killed, the rest fled, and the branches all collapsed. Zhenluo Alliance was originally afraid of the reverend behind the Lai Xian sect, but after probing a few times, they realized that this Taoist heavenly abode had no intention of interfering. Thus, they grew bolder and gradually extended their tentacles to Pingdong. However, this action made the Jinling sect and the Qingshi temple very dissatisfied. They originally intended to sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight, and they would make a move after the Zhenluo Alliance and Lai Xian sect suffered heavy injuries. But they never imagined that Lai Xian sect would be defeated so quickly, and when they recovered from their shock, it was already a step too late. For several months, the disciples of the 3 sects had been in constant conflict and there were many casualties. The reason why this Taoist of the Jinling sect still dared to come to the Double Moon Peak at this time was naturally because he had some confidence. At this moment, when he heard Zhang Yan asking about the whereabouts of Jinren Cheng, the Taoist only sneered. A disciple behind him said proudly, "Let me tell you, your Jinren Cheng had a fight with the elder of the Lai Xian sect at the Tianqiong Ridge. He was defeated and is now dead." The Taoist stroked his beard and sneered, glancing over. In the middle pillar state, if a sect didn't have a heavenly abode master to oversee it, then it would be like water without a source, a tree without roots. He thought that Zhang Yan would be scared out of his wits after hearing the news, but when he looked at Zhang Yan, he found that Zhang Yan's expression was calm, and he couldn't help but be surprised. At this time, a loud voice came from the Taoist palace. Elder Yan, do you think that the Zhenluo League will be afraid of the Jinling sect after Zhenrenqing is dead? The Taoist and Zhang Yan looked back and saw Zhang Qiangu walking out arrogantly, but there was no fear on his face. He walked to the side of the pavilion and saluted Zhang Yan. Then the Taoist sneered, Zhenren Yan, do you know who this is? At first, Elder Yan did not care and sat there without standing up. How could I possibly know all of the elders in your Zhenluo union? However, when he saw the faint smile on Zhang Qiangu's face, he couldn't help but stare blankly. A moment later, he seemed to recall something, and his expression flickered. Looking at Zhang Yan in bewilderment, he didn't dare to remain seated. He slowly left his seat and cupped his hands. Are you Zhenren Zhang? Zhang Yan glanced at him and said, Yes, it is I. Elder Yan sucked in a breath of cold air and could not help but take a step back. The combined might of Purist Temple and Golden Soaring sect was already greater than that of Chastity Alliance, but they didn't dare to push too hard. Most of the reason was because of Zhang Yan. Due to the fact that he had single-handedly wiped out Gong Yangxing's group of 7, they found out that he was still refining artifacts at the Twin Moon Peak. The two sects were also unsure of his relationship with the Zhenluo Union, so they restrained themselves. They didn't dare to push too hard. If it weren't for the fact that Jinren Cheng had passed away, Elder Yan wouldn't have dared to come here so boldly. However, he didn't expect to run into Zhang Yan as soon as he arrived, and even offended him with his words. He panicked and wanted to apologize. But he couldn't bring himself to do so. After pacing for a while, he cupped his hands to Zhang Yan, bowed, and rolled up his sleeves. He flew up into the sky and left without a word. Zhang Qiangu couldn't help but smile proudly as he watched him leave. This Elder Yan had been at the Twin Moon Peak for 2 days, but he was too overbearing. Therefore, they had always avoided him. Today, when he heard that Zhang Yan was here, he had a sudden inspiration and ordered someone to invite him over, so that he could borrow Zhang Yan's name to kill this person's arrogance. Now it seemed that the effect was quite good. He turned around and said to Zhang Yan with a face full of smiles, Jinren Zhang, have you finished refining artifacts and come to return the talisman? Why don't we have a talk in the hall? Zhang Yan nodded and stood up. But when he took a step forward, he raised his eyebrows and suddenly thought of something. Without the protection of Zhenluo Immortal, Zhenluo Alliance should have no confidence in the face of Jinling sect, but they were still so tough. Either the news of Jinren Cheng's death was wrong, or they had found another backer. He didn't believe that Jinling sect's news was wrong, otherwise Elder Yan wouldn't have come so arrogantly to bully him. Then it must be the latter reason. But there were only a few Jinren immortals in Middle Pillar State. Where could he find one in such a hurry? Thinking of this, his mind raced and he suddenly thought of a possibility. His footsteps suddenly stopped. Seeing him stop, Zhang Qiangu couldn't help but turn around, his eyes twinkling, Jinren, why don't you go? Zhang Yan glanced at him and said with a smile, I don't think it's so troublesome. Just give the talisman to Jinren. Zhang Qiangu was stunned and his eyes overflowed with ecstasy. He couldn't wait to extend his hand and said, that's great. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes slightly, but the smile on his face didn't change. He slowly put his hand into his sleeve, but there was a trace of coldness hidden in the depths of his eyes. However, at this moment, a ray of rainbow light flew in from outside the Taoist palace and suddenly stood between them. Both of them couldn't help but take a step back. Looking carefully, they found it was a winter plum blossom, a jade branch of ice flowers, pink with snow salt, and fragrant petals. The plum blossom swayed and flew towards Zhang Yan. He raised his eyebrows and took it in his hand, his eyes flashing. After a while, he looked up at Zhang Qiangu and said with a smile, I just remembered that I have something important to do today, so I'll take my leave. With that, he flicked his sleeve and flew out of the Feiyu Taoist palace. Zhang Qiangu couldn't help but be stunned. He chased after him and called out a few times, but there was no response. After a while, he suddenly thought of something and his expression changed drastically. He hurriedly ran back to the main hall and told everyone what had happened. "Everyone, I'm afraid that Master Zhang has already seen through something." Inside the main hall, the 5 elders that Zhang Yan had met before were all present, not a single one missing. Ouyang Su frowned and turned to look at Huang Zuoguang. Huang Zuoguang said unhappily, "Elder Ouyang, why are you looking at me? Although Daoist Zhang has done me a favor, I have already used 2 Daoist books to repay him. For this kind of matter, if we are not careful and provoke him into activating the formation, who among us can escape? How could I be so reckless?" Che Yi said slowly, "I'm afraid the problem lies with that plum blossom." First Elder Duan Hanfeng hesitated. "Plum blossom, could it be Spiritual Master Cheng?" When everyone heard this, their hearts trembled. Everyone here had been in the Zhenluo Union for hundreds of years, and they all knew that plum blossoms were Spiritual Master Cheng's favorite when he was alive. Now that the branch had appeared so strangely and was able to come and go as it pleased in the Feiyu Dao Palace, it was most likely the work of the Heavenly Abode Master. Huang Zuoguang couldn't help but shiver. Didn't they say that Spiritual Master Cheng is dead?" Ouyang Su shook his head and said in a deep voice, "It's hard to say. That person only said that if we worship him, Spiritual Master Cheng won't make things difficult for us. From his tone, it doesn't sound like he's dead either." Zhang Qiangu was frightened and said in a panic, "If that's the case, then the token is in Spiritual Master Zhang's hands. We've colluded with that person and even tried to capture him with the formation. If he knows the whole story, will he let us go so easily?" Che Yi coughed. His expression was very confident as he said, "Everyone, don't worry. We have just worshipped that person. If Xinren Qing were to make a move, that person would definitely not sit idly by. Otherwise, how can we convince the masses?" When he said this, everyone was relieved. After Zhang Yan left the Feiyu Dao Palace, a sword beam tore through the heavenly clouds and headed for the high heavens. It didn't take long for him to leave the Twin Peaks moon. After traveling for 2 hours, he found a mountain peak and used his dermic powers to open up a cave abode. He took out the winter plum blossom and didn't do anything else. He only waited for a moment, and a burst of fragrance slowly floated out from it. Soon after, a rosy cloud rushed out. When the cloud dispersed, a petite woman was seen floating in the air with her legs crossed. Her skin was snow white, her lips were a little red, and her eyes were bright like the stars in the sky. Her hair was draped over her shoulders, but she was only the size of a palm. It was obvious that she was a clone. Zhang Yan stood up and bowed to her, saying, "Spiritual Master Cheng, I greet you." Spiritual Master Cheng looked at him and said in a clear voice, "Fellow Taoist, are you wondering why I called you here? If you hand over that command talisman today, it will definitely be a disaster." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "How can I not know Spiritual Master Cheng's good intention?" Spiritual Master Cheng was surprised by his tone and asked curiously, "Could it be that fellow Taoist has found out something?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If not for Spiritual Master Cheng's summons, I would first take Zhang Qiangu into the heaven and earth leave for questioning. If what I think is true, I will kill him and turn the world upside down." He was just guessing before, but when he got the winter plum, he was almost sure that Zhenluo League had found that person to be their guest. Today's matter was indeed very dangerous. If he hadn't seen that something was wrong and Spiritual Master Cheng hadn't come out to stop them, once the talisman was handed over to the Zhenluo Union and the formation was activated, it would have been extremely difficult for them to escape. Spiritual Master Cheng thought for a moment and knew that Zhang Qiangu's words revealed a flaw, which was why Zhang Yan noticed it. She sighed softly and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I have been worshipped by the Zhenluo Union for more than 400 years, so I do have some kinship with them. Now that fellow Taoist Zhang is not injured in the slightest, please let them go for my sake." Zhang Yan seriously thought for a moment and nodded, "I can agree, but Spiritual Master Cheng didn't summon I here for this matter." Spiritual Master Cheng said, "To tell you the truth, when I fought with that person, I suffered a lot of injuries and decided to be reincarnated. In the past, I helped Tao Jinhong and Tao Jinren. I heard that fellow Daoist Zhang and Tao Jinren are friends, so I would like to ask fellow Daoist Zhang to send my body to the outer endless sea. What do you think? Zhang Yan changed his mind. Jinren Cheng had lent him the token of prohibition spell, which was a great help to him. He could use this opportunity to return the favor. Therefore, he did not think too much about it and immediately nodded his head in agreement. He smiled and said, I am duty-bound to help you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. M. Chapter 474. When Jinrenqing heard that Zhang Yan was willing to send her to the outer endless sea, she smiled at him and said, My body is sealed in an ice mirror in the Shuyang stream in the south. You just need to follow the plum blossom and you will find it. After saying a few more things that he needed to remember, she retracted the light-splitting shadow. The plum blossom paused in the air for a while and then flew toward the horizon. Zhang Yan rode the sword ray and in the blink of an eye, he broke through the high cloud and arrived above the extreme sky. A rainbow light flashed and followed the plum blossom. The plum blossom was like a crystal thread, traveling at an extremely fast speed. After traveling south for less than an hour, it suddenly sank and went through the high cloud, falling to the ground. When Zhang Yan saw this, he quickly guided the sword ray and followed it. He found himself in a dense forest deep in the mountains. Ancient trees towered into the sky here, and thick vines intertwined together. The terrain in the middle was sunken in, and it could be seen that it was a basin. The valley was full of exotic flowers and butterflies fluttering in the air, and the fragrance was simple and elegant. When the mountain breeze blew over, it was refreshing, and it made one's spirit rise. Although the scenery here was charming, the depths of the valley were dark and gloomy, and there was a faint layer of fog. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to notice that it was different from the normal mountain fog. This was the evil flowers of the mountains refined by Jinrencheng. It was placed here to protect the valley. If a cultivator's cultivation was not good enough, they would lose all strength in their limbs and lose their mind. Even if a Yuanying cultivator came, if he did not prepare in advance and inhaled it, he would feel dizzy and weak, and his combat ability would be greatly reduced. Zhang Yan had been taught by Jinrencheng, so he would not fall into the trap. The high cloud above his head rotated, and an auspicious light shone down. Shielding his body, he stepped on a green cloud and floated forward. After traveling for about 4 to 5 miles, he passed through the evil flowers. He turned around and took out a jade bottle. He took out a jade bottle and pinched a secret incantation from Jinrencheng. The murderous aura surged and gathered in the middle. Finally, it merged into one and entered the jade bottle. In just a moment, the murderous aura was completely absorbed. Zhang Yan closed the bottle and put it away. After putting away the jade bottle, he began to examine his surroundings. At this moment, what appeared in front of him was a pencil-shaped stone that was 50 feet tall, and green vines wrapped around it. There were green leaves, and between the gaps were scaly and claw-like patterns. At the very top, there was a strange purple flower that was a foot long, like a lotus or chrysanthemum. The flower had 12 petals, and its color was gorgeous as it swayed in the wind. That winter plum blossom had fallen in front of this flower, and it had already been smashed into pieces. The petals were broken, and there were spots of pink. Scattered all over the ground, a faint fragrance lingered. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves. Yu Feng moved forward. At the instant he approached, the bud of the violet flower trembled and emitted dense and clear air before holding out a prismatic ice mirror from within. He reached out and took it. The mirror in his hand shone against the light. There were ripples on the surface of the mirror, and light and shadow flickered. After a short while, Jinrencheng's figure appeared, but it was faintly discernible, like a shadow. When she saw Zhang Yan, she bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I still need to rely on your help on this trip to the Eastern Sea." Thank you in advance. Zhang Yan said, you're too polite. Thanks to the talisman that you gave me, I have a few more transcendent artifacts. Jinrenqing shook her head and said, this is the result of your own luck. Even without my help, you would still be able to pass safely. I can't let you go empty-handed. She pointed at her feet and said, fellow Taoist, please look. Zhang Yan looked down and saw that after giving away the ice mirror, the violet flower had retracted its bud. It had shrunk to a height of half a foot, but the petals were more delicate than before. The tender branches and green leaves were very attractive. Jinrenqing seemed to have thought of something. She sighed softly and said, this flower is called purple jade hairpin. I have searched all over the 9 prefectures in the past and only found this one. If the primordial spirit is entrusted with this flower, it will not disperse for more than 10 years if it doesn't use its mana at will. This flower has another use. If it is placed on an island, its fragrance will be very special. If there is a carp dragon swimming within a radius of 10,000 miles, it will definitely come and eat it. Now, I might as well give it to fellow Taoist as a token of my gratitude. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He also knew about the carp dragon. This creature was a natural creature. If one lived in the deep sea, one would need a carp dragon to guard it. It could calm the waves and command the surrounding aquatic creatures. However, this creature was very rare and often lived in the deep sea. Coupled with its powerful mana, it was very difficult to catch. There was one in Qi Yuntian's mysterious water palace. It was given by the demon tribe of the North Underworld continent when Qinsang school was at its peak. Since this flower had such an effect, he did not hesitate. With a wave of his hand, the flower was drawn out along with its roots and soil, and he carefully put it in his sleeve. After saying these words, Jinrenqing's figure became fainter. Thus, she spoke faster and said, I used a spell to summon you here, so I have consumed too much of my primordial qi. It's not convenient for me to speak too much, but I have to say something. Zhang Yan said, Jinren, please speak. Jinrenqing's expression turned serious. She solemnly warned, fellow Taoist, it would be best if nothing happens during your journey to the ocean. However, if there is an accident, remember not to protect me anymore. You must leave by yourself as soon as possible. Zhang Yanqi said, I wonder what kind of accident it is. Can Jinren tell me? Jinrenqing only shook her head and did not speak anymore. Her figure slowly dissipated from the ice mirror. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. He reached out to take the ice mirror and put it into his sleeve. Then, he leaped into the air and turned into a streak of golden light, heading toward the extreme sky. After determining the direction, he used his escape technique and flew at full speed. He relied on the astral winds to move, and his speed had already attained an unprecedented realm. In less than a month, he'd already successively passed 2 continents and arrived at the banks of the Eastern Sea. From afar, he could see boundless blue waves and spray that ceaselessly slapped onto the shore. Seeing that he was going to the open sea, he stopped and called, Is Uncle Master here? After a while, Jia Yugu came out lazily. He yawned and said, What's the matter, junior nephew? He looked left and right for a while, then exclaimed, Are we at the Eastern Sea? Junior nephew, why are you here? Ever since he refined the Green Yang Gale, Jia Yugu had been sleeping all day and rarely showed himself. He seemed to be recovering his vitality and was unaware of what was happening in the outside world. Zhang Yan smiled and told him the whole story. At the end, he said, Junior nephew wants to send Jinrenqing's body to the East Sea. If it's inconvenient for Uncle Master, you can return to the sect first. Yugu's eyes rolled and he waved his hand. Why chase me away, junior nephew? It's rare for Uncle Master to come out. If I go back, I'll be refined by Qin Mabai again. I don't know when I'll be able to come out again. I might as well follow you outside for a few more days. Hearing the resentment in his tone, Zhang Yan smiled. That's fine. But if junior nephew needs to ask Uncle Master for help, I hope you won't refuse. The fish drum true spirit patted its chest loudly and said, "Of course." At this point, he yawned again and patted his mouth. "I'll go take a nap first. But if junior nephew sees good wine and beauties, don't forget to greet me." When he finished, he didn't wait for Zhang Yan's reply. He turned around and disappeared into thin air. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. He took off again and broke through the high clouds, heading east. After an unknown period of time, he felt a throbbing in his sleeve. The cyclone rolled as if something was about to rush out. He stopped in his tracks and shook his sleeve. A green-skinned bottle gourd rolled out of it. As soon as it appeared, there was a sudden explosion, and it exploded into pieces. Then, a dark cloud flew out with a boom. Zhang Yan took a careful look and noticed that this dark cloud was actually formed from a few thousand cocoons. As soon as they arrived in the air, they all broke apart, and then numerous six-winged strange insects bore out from within. However, their wings were translucent and still carried water stains, and under the illumination of the scorching sun, a seven-colored light and shadow suffused them. One of them was especially large. As soon as it saw the sunlight, it moved closer to Zhang Yan, squeaking around him to show its affection. Zhang Yan recognized that it was the bloodline gold insect that recognized him as its master. However, it fell into a deep sleep after eating a few bodies of Lai Xian cult's disciples. It hadn't moved for more than 30 years and he had long forgotten about it. He didn't expect it to wake up again and even give birth to so many disciples and grand-disciples. As the insect let out a cry, the rest of the insects followed suit. Because they were connected by blood, Zhang Yan knew that it was caused by hunger. However, he didn't dare to leave to look for food. Originally, there were a few corpses of Lai Xian cult's elders in his true light. However, they had already been swallowed by the devil's slip. Now, there was nothing else to feed them. He thought for a moment, then pressed down on the spell. He descended from the cloud and rode the wind on the surface of the sea. After circling once, he reached out with his hand, and in an instant, huge waves surged. A pillar of water that was hundreds of feet high shot up, carrying an unknown number of aquatic creatures. He said, "Go." These blood insects couldn't wait any longer. Once they received his order, they swarmed forward like locusts. In just a moment, they swallowed all the aquatic creatures, including their skin and bones. After Zhang Yan used the same method a few times, he suddenly saw the waves in front of him surging. A person was walking on the waves. This person looked about 20 years old. He looked like a handsome scholar. However, there was a protrusion in the middle of his forehead. It was bright red and looked like a tentacle. The person shouted, "Where did this Taoist come from? Don't you know that this is under the Reef Prefecture? How dare you kill the aquatic creatures? Don't you want to live?" Zhang Yan frowned. He knew that there were many big and small forces on the Eastern Sea, and some of them had rather strong cultivations. Although he was not afraid, there was no need for him to purposely provoke them. That was why he avoided those monsters that had cultivated to a high level, and only found some ordinary aquatic creatures. However, this person's cultivation was not high, but his tone was not small. He had heard of the reputation of the Reef Prefecture of the East Sea. It was a rare family among the demon cultivators. There were many people there. However, with his current cultivation, he didn't need to worry about it. He sneered and ignored him. He pointed his hand and another water column rushed up. Although the person couldn't see Zhang Yan's cultivation, he was used to doing whatever he wanted in this sea. Seeing that Zhang Yan did as he pleased and ignored his words, he couldn't help but be angry. He pressed his hands forward and instantly, countless waves rolled up. They rose higher and higher. In an instant, they turned into hundreds of feet high waves and pressed forward. Zhang Yan sat there without moving. He casually glanced at it and casually waved his hand. His large sleeve swept past and a yellow radiance spread out. The dust covered the sun and it was like sand filling the sky. With a rumbling sound, the huge wave was smashed into pieces. Chapter 475. This scholar was the 18th son of the East Blue Reef Prefecture's lord. His name was Lu Jiu, and he was only 100 years old. Today, he had avoided the prefecture guards and came to play by himself. Normally, he was used to being flattered by his subordinates. He thought that he was a powerful cultivator, and apart from a few elders, no one in this area could be his opponent. Because he saw Zhang Yan capture the aquatic creatures, he felt bored and decided to start a fight. He originally didn't have any experience in battle, so when he saw Zhang Yan destroy his Dao art with a raise of his hand, he was instantly stunned on the spot and at a loss for what to do. At this time, he suddenly heard a strange buzzing sound in his ears. Looking up, he saw thousands of blood-thread gold insects swarming towards him. Panicking, he fumbled around his sleeve and took out a conch shell. Puffing up his cheeks, he blew into it with all his might. As he blew, the wind on the ocean became faster and the waves surged. Each wave was higher than the one before, and they kept rushing toward the swarm of insects. However, the blood-thread gold insects' bodies were tough, and water and fire couldn't harm them. Even after several waves passed by, they weren't damaged at all apart from their wings getting wet. Lu Jiu was only at the mystic light realm and wasn't proficient in Dao techniques, so he could only use these few moves. Seeing the swarm of insects getting closer and closer, he opened his mouth and sucked. A gust of wind appeared in his throat and instantly swallowed all the golden insects into his stomach. He then turned around and dove into the water. Seeing this, Zhang Yan revealed a mocking expression. He shook his head and didn't chase after him, allowing him to escape. Before Lu Jiu could even take 2 steps, he suddenly let out a miserable scream. Countless golden worms crawled out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. In an instant, his entire body was wrapped up by the densely packed golden worms. Like a whirlwind that swept away the clouds, he was completely devoured from the inside out. Not even his bones were left. After eating this ignorant little beast, the group of blood-thread gold insects flew toward Zhang Yan and danced around him, as if they weren't full yet. Zhang Yan didn't care at all. It was fine even if these insects were hungry for a long time. Feeding them once was enough, there was no need to spoil them. He rolled up his sleeves and collected all the worms. Then, he waved his sleeves and leaped into the air, using his escape technique. He continued to head east. In the past, he had to rely on the ship of Chi Dragon to come here, and he had gone through countless dangerous waves. Now that he was in the Yuanying state, he could cross the East Sea with the help of the extreme heavenly gale. In just a few days, the mountain gate of the Clear Feather sect was already in sight. Zhang Yan looked out from the clouds. Unlike when he had left, the Clear Feather sect seemed to be even more prosperous than when he had left. There were now several hundred islands of various sizes scattered across the sea like pearls. In the sky, there were disciples on duty patrolling on cranes, traveling gracefully. One could faintly see the atmosphere of the celestial sect of wonders. He parted the high cloud and descended. They stopped in front of the guardian formation. Immediately, a boy on duty came to welcome him on a white crane. He bowed and said, "May I know which Taoist has come to our Clear Feather sect?" Previously, Jinren Cheng had sent a letter. Zhang Yan thought that Tao Jinren must have received it, so he bowed and said, "You can go and report that East Flower Zhang Yan has escorted Jinren Cheng's conjured body here." The boy had never heard of Zhang Yan's name before, but he had heard of the word Jinren. Although he didn't know what was going on, he understood that it was definitely not a small matter. He quickly returned the greeting and said, "Please wait, Taoist. I will go and report now." He turned and entered the formation, returning to the hall on duty. He bowed to a delicate and pretty girl in the hall and said, "Uncle Master, there is a Taoist who came to deliver Jinren Cheng's conjured body here. Should I invite him in?" The young girl was playing with a furry, ball-like snow-white mouse in her hand for fun. Hearing the 3 words Jinren Cheng, she exclaimed, stood up and said, "This matter is under Shifu's instructions, I'll personally go and welcome him." She poked the snow-white mouse's nose, and it squeaked and leaped up, lying on her shoulder. The girl made a gesture with one hand and summoned a breeze to push her out of the palace gate. She turned and went outside the hall. She looked up and saw Zhang Yan standing outside the hall with his hands clasped behind his back. He was wearing a black robe and looked handsome. She praised him in her heart, saying, "This Taoist is really good-looking." She walked forward and bowed, saying, "My daughter, Shui Xingying, is here to welcome Jinren Cheng's conjured body under the orders of the Grandmaster. Taoist, please follow me in." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble." Shui Xingying wanted to talk more with Zhang Yan, but for some reason, she felt an inexplicable pressure standing beside him, so she did not dare to speak. She could not help but feel curious and thought, this must be Jinren Cheng's disciple. His cultivation base must be very high. Maybe this Taoist has the same cultivation base as the Uncle Masters and Uncle Masters. She did not know Jinren Cheng's background and only thought that he was a Yuanying cultivator. After the establishment of Clear Feather School, many rogue cultivators came to join them, but she had never seen a cultivator above core formation. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly asked, "Which Taoist are you under?" Shui Xingying answered, "My daughter is under Master Wang." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "So you're a disciple of fellow Taoist Wang Yingfang." "Back then, I was a guest here, and many of fellow Taoist Wang's outstanding disciples met me. However, I didn't see you at that time, so you must have joined Clear Feather sect after it was established." Shui Xingying heard that he seemed to have some relationship with her master, so she became even more respectful and said with a hint of pride, "Taoist's eyes are not wrong. My daughter has only been in the school for less than 20 years. Zhang Yan turned around and looked at her from top to bottom. He said, "Not bad. Less than 20 years and you have reached the second level of Mystic Light Realm. Your talent is not bad." When Shui Xingying heard this, she pouted. Everyone in the school praised her talent for reaching the second level of Mystic Light Realm in just 15 years. Even the disciples of the big sects could not compare. However, when it came to Zhang Yan, he only said, "Not bad." Zhang Yan only smiled and asked, "Is Taoist Guolai in the palace? I haven't seen him for dozens of years. I wonder what level his cultivation is now." Shui Xingying calmed herself down and answered, "Martial Uncle is currently at the third level of core transformation." From what she could see, Guolai's cultivation was one of the best in the school apart from the ancestral master. However, when she saw that Zhang Yan had no expression on his face, she couldn't help but feel angry, so she added, "Martial Uncle Zhao and Martial Uncle Yang are in seclusion recently. I heard that they have a chance of entering the Yuanying realm." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Taoist Song and Taoist Yang are both people with deep roots. They have a chance of breaking through in the next few decades." He was just flattering them. In reality, it wasn't so easy to enter the Yuanying realm. One had to look at the grade of the pill first, then the grotto heaven and blessed land, and then whether there were treasures to help. If they relied on themselves to absorb the evil qi, it would take countless years. Even though the Yuanying cultivators in the central pillar state didn't lack anything, most of them only had achievements at around 500 years old. Although the disciples that Tao Jinren took in weren't ordinary, a few decades was too fast. Zhang Yan hadn't been to the Far Sea for a long time, so he casually asked Shui Xingying a few questions. Only then did he know that the Far Sea wasn't an otherworldly land of immortals. There were still conflicts and killings. Now, there were three major forces here. Clear Feather Sect was one, Chongyu True Temple was another, and the last one was somewhat related to Qinsang School. It was the branch of the Chu clan that left the Three Lakes Lake. Each of the three had a Grotto Heaven's disciple in their sections. In comparison, Clear Feather Sect had the shallowest foundation and was the weakest. It had few disciples and was supported by Tao Jinren alone. But for the past few decades, Clear Feather Sect stood firm. Their forces didn't diminish, but grew instead. They were on par with the other two sects in the Far Sea, which showed the capability of this enlightened master. After walking for an hour, the two arrived at the peak of Mysterious Spirit Island. In front of the steps of the Grand Master Hall, there were two ferocious white apes that were 30 feet tall guarding. They were staring at the two of them. Shui Xingying rolled her eyes and said, "Uncle Master, the Grand Master is in the inner hall. It isn't convenient for me to send you off. Please go ahead." Now that perfected Tao was the founder of a sect, even the 4 disciples under him could not enter without being summoned by the talisman. The 2 white apes here were strange beasts of the far sea. They were captured by Tao Xinren to guard the mountain gate. They had the strength to move mountains and were ferocious. They could even fight a Yuanying cultivator for a while on flat ground. In the past, a demon king came to visit Tao Xinren. Because he forgot to bring his protective talisman, he was torn apart by the 2 strange beasts. Since then, no matter if it was a disciple or a demon king, as long as they came to visit Tao Xinren, they had to bring their talisman with them. Shui Xingying didn't have any bad intentions when she let Zhang Yan go. It was just that Zhang Yan's tone sounded like he didn't care about the uncle masters in the sect. She couldn't help but feel indignant and wanted to scare him. She had a talisman with her. Even if the white ape wanted to show off, she could calm it down at any time. Zhang Yan could see through her thoughts. He smiled and walked inside. The 2 white apes widened their ferocious eyes as they stared at him. Faint roars came from their mouths as they made a stance to kill him. However, they didn't stop until his figure disappeared. But they didn't do anything. Shui Xingying's eyes widened, her face filled with disbelief. She bit her lower lip and thought, when I get back, I must ask Master about this Taoist's background. When Zhang Yan reached the inner hall, he got his bearings and walked up the jade stairs. After passing the 36th step, he went up to the 2nd floor and then passed the 36th step. He went up 6 steps in a row and went around an incense burner that was as tall as a person. Just now, he arrived at the main hall. He looked up and saw a young Taoist sitting in the hall with a rui in his hand. Beside him was a green phoenix with bright feathers. 2 boys stood on both sides and smiled at him. He quickly went forward and cupped his fists. Zhang Yan greets Tao Xinren. Tao Xinren sighed and said, "The journey from Middle Pillar State to my Clear Feather sect is long and full of dangers. How could Daoist Cheng have the confidence to come here? I didn't expect Daoist Cheng to send me off." No wonder, no wonder. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised. His journey here wasn't smooth and uneventful, but it wasn't a disaster either. However, he saw that Tao Xinren didn't seem to have any intention to say it. His eyes flickered as he thought about what Spiritual Master Cheng said. This matter must be related to Spiritual Master Dongtian's secret. Suddenly, there was a sound and a flash of light. A letter flew into the hall. The boy beside Tao Xinren took it and presented it respectfully. Spiritual Master Tao opened it and smiled indifferently. He threw the letter aside and raised his head. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, did you kill a small demon when you came?" Chapter 476. It's so cool to read without advertisements. Zhang Yan glanced at the letter and thought to himself that the little demon he killed must have some kind of background. His thoughts changed and he said frankly, "It's true. When I was passing through the East Sea, there was a fierce demon cultivator who attacked me without asking for the reason. I thought he was rude, so I sent him away. I don't know how I alarmed you, immortal." Tao Xinren smiled lightly and said, "This person is the 18th son of Reef Prefecture's Prefecture Lord Lu Xingyuan. He was favored by his father. After you killed him, he tracked you all the way here and found out that you came to my Clear Feather sect. He mistakenly thought that you were a disciple of my sect, so he mustered a large force and gathered demon soldiers to come to seek justice." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and was extremely surprised, but it wasn't because of the little demon's identity. Not to mention the son of Reef Prefecture's Prefecture Lord, even if the Prefecture Lord came personally, there would be no reason for him to show mercy. However, they did not know where the other party got the courage from to actually dare to bully the Clear Feather sect. Although Reef Prefecture was an aristocratic family that had existed for tens of thousands of years and once had a celestial abode master, it had been hundreds of years since he passed away and was already showing signs of decline. It was really inconceivable that he would bare his fangs and claws at Tao Xinren. Tao Xinren wasn't surprised and said with a faint smile, "That person is a demon cultivator and is very close to the Chu clan. This isn't the first or second day. There were several strange movements before, but they were all resolved by me. This time, he found an opportunity and came to stir up trouble again. I expect that Celestial Abode Master Chu is prepared and watching from the side. If I show myself, he will most likely come to stop me." Zhang Yan couldn't help but come to a realization. No wonder Reef Prefecture was so bold. It turned out that they had the support of another Phantasm Realm cultivator. The Reef Prefecture was originally well-established and flourishing in the Eastern Sea. The prefecture governed over 1,000 spiritual islands and over 100 scattered sections. However, after the Clear Feather sect was established, many small sects turned to the Clear Feather sect. As a result, the two sects became enemies. Lu Yuanqing knew that he could not contend against the Clear Feather sect with just the power of the Reef Manor. Thus, he established a relationship with the Chu clan, who had also retreated from the East Flower sect. He was willing to be their pawn. They opposed the Clear Feather sect in every aspect. Although the death of his son, Lu Ji, had enraged him greatly, it was far from the point of making a big fuss. He was merely using this as an excuse to make things difficult for them. As for the Clear Feather sect, they were at a disadvantage because they did not have perfected Yuanying. Other than Tao Xinren, no one else could touch the Reef Manor. As the founder of a sect, Tao Xinren could not act rashly. Otherwise, it would cause Chu Xinren to intervene. If that happened, the situation would get out of hand, and that was why he became even more arrogant. Zhang Yan's expression showed some doubt. He said, "There is one thing that I don't understand. How did the Blue Reef Manor know that I was coming to the Clear Feather sect? When he killed Lu Ji, there was no one else around. Otherwise, the Star's sword pellet would have given him a warning. After that, he went straight to the Clear Feather sect. He did not stop along the way. After entering Mysterious Spirit Island, he did not even rest for a moment before coming to see Tao Xinren. The Reef Manor almost immediately made a move. The speed of their reaction was somewhat inconceivable. Tao Xinren smiled and explained to him, "It's nothing strange. The Reef Manor raises many turtle spirits, and they call them immortal elders. These people cultivate Tao without seeking results. It's just that it's very difficult to calculate your background for their master. But to calculate where you are going, you just have to sacrifice a few lives." Zhang Yan nodded in understanding inside. I didn't expect Ai's unintentional action to cause so much trouble for Tao Xinren. Tao Xinren did not mind. He originally wanted to wait until his disciple reached the nascent soul stage before dealing with the Reef Manor. Therefore, he did not act up and cleverly resolved several crises. However, he also knew that the Reef Manor would definitely not give the Clear Feather sect the time to do so. Even if this matter did not happen, they would have taken action sooner or later. Thus, he shook his head and smiled. "This is not your fault." Zhang Yan pondered for a while and cupped his hands. "This matter started because of me. I cannot let the Clear Feather sect's disciple take the blame on my behalf. I should come forward and settle this karma for you." Tao Xinren turned his head and looked at Zhang Yan. His gaze was like the stars in the sky, as if it could see through everything. However, Zhang Yan did not avoid it and looked back at him. After a while, Tao Xinren retracted his gaze and laughed. "Since you have done this, I will owe you another karma." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. He continued, "You have done one karma and one karma. You did not suffer a loss." When Spiritual Master Tao heard this, he couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Fine, this matter will be settled by fellow Taoist, but there's no rush to make a move. I expect that the Reef Manor won't come here alone, they will definitely collude with the sects that are close to them to strengthen their momentum. It won't be too late to make a move after a few days. Zhang Yan immediately understood. Tao Xinren wanted to beat them at their own game and use this opportunity to eradicate all the forces in the reef manor. He bowed and said, "I will do as you say." Tao Xinren nodded slightly and said, "Fellow Zhang, where is Tao Xinren's Dharma body?" Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out the ice mirror. When Tao Xinren saw that, he raised his hand and summoned the ice mirror into his hand. He took a look inside. "I have cultivated for 1,000 years, but my mystical abilities are scattered in one day. It is all in vain if I do not enter the heavenly gate." He flipped his hand again and kept the ice mirror somewhere. He said, "The surrounding 5,000 kilometers of the sea are all under the clear feather sect's boundary. There is a huge array protecting it. Fellow Taoist, you can move around freely. You will see the results in a few days." At that moment, more than 100 sea boats were 5,000 kilometers away from the clear feather sect. Black winds blew on the surface of the sea, and banners fluttered. Demonic aura filled the air. Wherever the boats passed, there was no wind or waves. It was like a flat mirror or a rock. The scene was extremely strange. These were the 8,000 demon soldiers led by the demon general of the reef manor, Lu Changsu. They were the vanguard for the clear feather sect. Lu Changsu sat in the cabin. He was holding a bloody sea python with both hands and chewing it. He did not care about eating raw food at all. He had a burly body and was about 40 years old. He had broad shoulders and a thick back. His legs were as thick as pillars. He looked like a general who commanded troops in the mortal world. From his appearance, one would mistake him for a demon cultivator who cultivated the strength path. In reality, the reef manor cultivated the righteous chi path. However, because the disciples of the manor were all dragon whales that became demons, their bodies were different from normal people. It was difficult for them to restrain themselves. There was an old man beside him with a worried frown. He said worriedly, "Old master, if we force our way in like this, Tao Xinhong might fly into a rage out of humiliation. All of us will lose our lives." Lu Changsu quickly removed the remaining 2-meter-long python's body and stuffed it into his mouth before swallowing it whole. After burping, he rubbed his belly and said disapprovingly, "Steward Yao, you're overthinking it. We're not going to attack the Clear Feathers sect. We're just going to seek justice. Why would Tao Xinhong lower himself to make things difficult for us? Even if he really doesn't care about his reputation, there is still Taoist Master Chu. He will stand up for us. What is there to worry about?" Although he looked rough, his mind was clear. He knew that he was only here to show off his strength. He was not in a hurry to fight the Clear Feather sect. Reef Manor had a legacy of 10,000 years. There were many disciples in the clan, and there were many sects in the manor. It was not easy for him to accumulate this bit of wealth. How could he bear to use it to fight? Steward Yao still did not feel at ease. He felt that this matter was difficult to deal with. He twirled his beard and said, "What if Tao Xinhong hands the person over? Won't we be able to stop this? If the manor head condemns us?" Lu Changsu laughed loudly. "Isn't that exactly what we want? If he can't even protect his own disciple, how will Tao Daoren have the face to stand on the Eastern Sea? Who will be willing to listen to him in the future? The manor head will be overjoyed. Why would he blame me? Steward Yao, the older you get, the more timid you become." Steward Yao mumbled, "There is no harm in being careful." Lu Changsu looked at him in disdain. No matter what the outcome of this trip was, as long as they could make a round in front of the Clear Feather sect and retreat in one piece, it would be considered a success. At that time, the Clear Feather sect's reputation would definitely plummet. If there was only the Clear Feather sect on the Eastern Sea, it would not be affected in the slightest. But now that there were 3 sects vying for supremacy, it was a different story. The Clear Feather sect had only been established for a few decades. Other than the disciples in the sect, they still had to rely on many of the scattered sects on the Eastern Sea. These people were already wavering and would change according to the wind. They had relied on Tao Xinren's reputation to intimidate them. However, if this matter were to spread, with the other two sects adding fuel to the fire, the forces that the Clear Feather sect could use would definitely be greatly reduced. Lu Changsu actually admired manor head Lu Yuanqing's decisiveness. This time, he had acted decisively, and it just so happened that he had poked at the Clear Feather sect's weak spot. If things went smoothly, they would be suppressed without a single drop of blood. At this moment, a small demon came to report and said, "General, there is a Taoist riding a shark outside blocking the way of our ship." Lu Changsu was startled and thought to herself, could it be Tao Doran's doing? He gave a shout, and the aura of Dan around him surged wildly. A wave of black smoke rolled up from the ground and rolled out, sending him out of the room. When he was outside, he stood on the deck and looked up. He saw a Daoran with a goatee standing on the back of a ferocious shark. His figure was skinny and his eyes were bright. His sleeves were wide and hung down to his feet. He cupped his fists and said, "I, Cui Mulong, am passing by here. I heard that General Lu wants to go to Clear Feather sect to seek justice. Coincidentally, I also have some enmity with Clear Feather sect's Guolai. I am willing to go with General and boost our momentum. Is that okay?" Lu Changsu observed his aura. He was afraid that he had not reached the second level of core transformation and was much weaker than himself. He could not help but look down on him. He chuckled and said with squinted eyes, "May I know which sect fellow Taoist is from?" Cui Mulong said, "I am just a wild Taoist. I am not as noble as fellow Taoist. However, 400 years ago, I was an unnamed disciple of Hengshan Patriarch." Lu Changsu was instantly shocked, and his expression became serious. Hengshan Patriarch was an extraordinary person. There were so many powerful cultivators in the East Ocean, but no one knew where he was from. More than 1,000 years ago, this person preached Tao on the East Ocean. Half of the 18 demon kings in the East Ocean had listened to his lectures. Even Tao Xinren's disciple, Wang Yingfang, had been under his tutelage. If this Taoist was really his disciple, he was really qualified to travel with him. He bowed sideways and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist, please come in." Cui Mulong bowed and took a step forward. There seemed to be a ferocious shadow flashing behind him. In the blink of an eye, he was on the deck. Lu Changsu's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not show it on his face, but his heart was in turmoil. He was secretly surprised. Why does this person's dharma have some traces of the devil sect in it? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. For the latest and fastest chapters, please go to. Reading is a pleasure. I suggest you collect it. For more complete novels, please go to download. Chapter 477. Xian Ling's strategy to eliminate demons. 3 days later, Lu Changsu led 8,000 demon soldiers and arrived at Clear Feather sect's mountain gate. However, he did not get too close. He only sent a letter to Clear Feather sect and did not make any further movements. He only suppressed the army formation and wandered far away from the formation. Look. A few more days passed. Lu Changsu was having a banquet in the cabin when he suddenly heard a loud sound from the sky. He hurriedly threw away the wine cup in his hand and ran out to look at the horizon. He saw layers of thick clouds appearing on the surface of the sea, as if they were covered with snow and frost, at the same level as the sky and sea. They were like a line of white jade, extending to the north and south, gradually disappearing into the distant sky. He was immediately excited and said, "It's the prefecture master." Steward Yao saw this and could not help but gasp. He said in shock, "Prefecture master, aren't you going to summon all the people in the sect?" At this moment, there was a huge ship floating above the clouds. It was 2,000 feet long from the beginning to the end. It had a dragon's head and a phoenix's tail, and it had 8 floors. There were 108 sea pythons guarding the ship. They were all winged, golden-eyed, silver-scaled mutants. In front of them, there was a row of stairs that were 100 zhang wide hanging down, falling straight into the mist and water smoke. On the two sides, there were 20 horizontal rods, each controlled by a whale guard that was 30 zhang tall. Their shouts shook the heavens and the earth. Every time they shook, the sea of clouds would tremble, like a mountain moving forward slowly. Prefecture Master Lu Yuanqing was sitting in the main hall of the ship, looking at mysterious Spirit Island that was hidden by the mountain mist. He looked to be in his 60s, his temples were white, and he wore a crown with golden wings and pearls on his head. He wore a double sun-bright robe, a silver python purple belt around his waist, and a sleeveless cloak covering his body. On top of his head, there were 3 strong clouds that surged in the sky. This time, he came to Clear Feather Sect. 47 islands under the sect responded, and there were a total of 350,000 demon soldiers. It could be said that he had taken out all the resources he had. If not for those powerful cultivators, such a force was enough to dominate Eastern Sea. However, Lu Yuanqing was still not satisfied. One had to know that the Reef Mansion could originally mobilize more than 500,000 demon soldiers at will, and could even fight against any one of the 8 demon tribes of the northern nether continent. However, after the death of the ancestor immortal of the heavenly abode, the momentum was not as good as before. The establishment of the Clear Feather Sect in the distant sea made matters worse. In just a few decades, their faction shrank by more than 30%. Such a situation. If he didn't try to reveal his edge, then it probably wouldn't be long before Reef Manor would have no choice but to attach itself to Clear Feather's sect, and this forced him to have no choice but to seize this opportunity and make a risky move. Just as he was deep in thought with his eyes closed, a servant in front of him reported, "Manor Head, General Lu Changsu requests an audience." Lu Yuanqing immediately cast aside his thoughts. He sat up straight and said in a deep voice, "Call him up." Not long after, Lu Changsu arrived at the bottom of the stairs and prostrated herself on the ground. He loudly said, "This general greets the manor head." Lu Yuanqing said, "Changsu, have you delivered the letter I asked you to deliver?" Lu Changsu cupped his fists and replied respectfully, "A few days ago, I sent a letter to Tao Zhenren to hand over the disciple who killed the 18th prince. However, the Clear Feather Sect ignored it." Lu Xingyuan nodded and said, "This matter is within my expectations. You've worked hard these few days." He stretched out his hand and picked up a bucket of jade beads from the big vat beside him. "I'll give you a pot of essence pearl. Take it and cultivate well." Lu Changsu was overjoyed. "Thank you, Manor Lord. Such a good thing." This was not something that could be easily obtained. He looked at the pearl that was filled to the brim with covetous eyes, walked forward in large strides, and respectfully received the cup. At this moment, a streak of smoke suddenly appeared in the sky and headed towards mysterious Spirit Island. Everyone on the boat noticed it, but no one made a move. Lu Changsu also stared at it for a while. He suddenly shouted, "That's Wang Yingfang." He turned his head and said excitedly to Lu Yuanqing, "Manor Head, do you want this general to capture her?" Wang Yingfang was one of the 4 great disciples of Tao Zhenren. If she was captured or killed, it would be cutting off a section of Clear Feather Sect's wings. Lu Yuanqing stared closely at Wang Yingfang's figure but still did not give the order. Seeing the streak of light get closer to the mysterious spirit array, Lu Changsu immediately panicked. Disregarding seniority, he came up and grabbed Lu Yuanqing's sleeve, calling out, "Manor Head." Lu Yuanqing calmly thought about it. He had come in such a fierce manner this time, looking fierce and imposing, but in reality, he was walking on the edge of a cliff. If he was the slightest bit careless, he would die a horrible death. Moreover, he was only here to suppress Clear Feather Sect's reputation, not to take revenge for his son. Thus, he said, "A disciple of Clear Feather Sect killed my beloved son, so I came to seek justice. That is the right thing to do. Wang Yingfang is Tao Doran's direct disciple. If we make a move, there will be no way out. Let her go." Lu Changsu could not help but be disappointed, but there was nothing he could do. He could only retreat resentfully. Lu Yuanqing glanced at him and gently comforted him, "Changsu, there is no need to be impatient. Tao Daoren does not have any Yuanying disciples. Unless he personally makes a move, we will definitely win. Why take the risk?" Lu Changsu agreed in a low voice, but in his heart, he did not agree and cursed. Reef Manor had made such a big move, how could Tao Zhenhong be kind in the future? Since he had already offended him, he might as well offend him thoroughly. Anyway, with Chu Zhenren watching from the side, there was no need to be afraid of Tao Zhenhong. Why should he be so timid? On the other side, Wang Yingfang had already rushed back to Mysterious Spirit Island. Among the 4 disciples of Clear Feather sect, 3 of them were cultivating in seclusion on the island, hoping to enter the Yuanying state. Now, she was the only one managing the daily affairs. She was originally fighting with a scattered sect on Clear Wave Island tens of thousands of miles away. Just as she was about to succeed, she received a talisman and learned that something had happened in the sect, so she hurried back. She flew along the mountain path and arrived in front of the Patriarch Hall. She said, "Disciple Wang Yingfang wishes to see the Patriarch." The Taoist boy in front of the door did not move. He only said, "The Patriarch has decreed that Uncle Master will go and restrain the disciples. They are not to go out without orders. There will be people to deal with the demons outside the door later." Wang Yingfang was startled and thought to herself, that old demon Lu is a Yuanying Zhenren. He is very difficult to deal with. Does Master mean that one of the disciples has broken through to the Yuanying state? Then, she shook her head. How could it be that it was so easy to reach the Yuanying state? Could it be one of the demon kings in the sect? However, even though the Reef Prefecture had declined, its foundation was still there. Not to mention that Lu Yuanqing was a second-stage nascent soul realm cultivator, there were already 7 disciples who had reached the core transformation realm and 2 nascent soul realm elders. Such a force was not something that the Clear Feather sect could compare to for the time being. Although Reef Prefecture did not attack the island because of Tao Zhenren, this kind of behavior would definitely cause Clear Feather sect's prestige to fall to the ground if they did not respond to it. She sighed to herself. Unfortunately, Clear Feather sect had not been established for a long time and did not have a killing true weapon. Otherwise, if she used it, who would dare to bully them? As she thought about it, she walked down the mountain. At this moment, she saw a group of more than 10 disciples walking out of the island. The disciple at the front was wearing a black Taoist robe. He held a magic sword and stood on a heavenly crane. Wang Yingfang recognized that this was the disciple of her junior brother Yang Lin. Her eyes narrowed and she scolded, "Ling Tianqing, what are you doing?" The disciple called Ling Tianqing turned around. When he saw Wang Yingfang, he hesitated for a moment and stepped forward. He gritted his teeth and said, "Third martial ant, I want to go out and kill this group of demons." "Nonsense." Wang Yingfang looked at him with a straight face. She did not reprimand him but said in a deep voice, "Listen carefully. From now on, all disciples are to guard the sect. Do your homework in the morning and evening. You are not allowed to go out. Quickly disperse." Ling Tianxing's face instantly turned red. His mouth moved a few times, but in the end, he did not dare to disobey. He bowed, turned around, and left. When the senior and junior brothers behind him saw this scene, they could only sigh at each other and dejectedly disperse. Wang Yingfang looked at the back of the group. She scoffed and said, "Shui Xiuying, stay. I have something to ask you." Shui Xiuying was originally hiding behind the people and wanted to leave. When she heard Wang Yingfang calling her, her body trembled. She lowered her head and walked forward, saying, "Master." Wang Yingfang did not reprimand her and simply replied, "Your master has just received a letter to return to the mountain gate." However, the contents of the letter were vague. "Your master wants to ask you, what is the matter that has caused the Reef residents to make such a big fuss?" Though she knew that Reef Manor wanted to make a move, she had been trying her best to avoid it. This time, she did not know what excuse they had. Shui Xingying answered honestly, disciple heard that it was a disciple of my sect who killed old demon Lu's son. Wang Yingfang frowned, a disciple from my sect. Who? Shui Xiuying shook her head, indicating that she did not know. Wang Yingfang lowered her head and pondered. After a while, she suddenly looked up and said, recently, has there been anyone from the sea coming to Clear Feather sect? Shui Xiuying nodded and said, yes, yes. A few days ago, a Taoist Zhang from Donghua continent came to the island to pay his respects to the patriarch. Master does not know that this Taoist is quite capable. He did not have any talismans with him, but the two white apes in front of the patriarch's hall did not stop him. Zhang. From Donghua continent. Wang Yingfang's thoughts turned and she thought, could it be Taoist Zhang? Yes, it must be him. Only he could meet my master so easily. That Lu Yuanqing's son was most likely killed by Taoist Zhang. Although his cultivation is extraordinary and his flying sword technique is brilliant, the reef manner is too powerful. I think he could only come to Clear Feather sect to avoid trouble. When she first met Zhang Yan, he was only at the mystic light realm. Now that she had not seen him for decades, she thought that even if he was a disciple of a large Qinsang sect, he would at most be at the third level of the core transformation realm. On the other hand, the Reef Manor Master was a second-level Yuanying cultivator. The two of them could not be compared. Thinking about this, she could not help but complain about Zhang Yan, but at the same time, she sighed, my sect owes Taoist Zhang a great favor. No matter what, I can only think of a way to protect him. At this moment, in the Patriarch's hall, Tao Zhenren, who was meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and said, Tong, go and invite Taoist Zhang here. Not long after, Zhang Yan came to the main hall and bowed, greetings, spiritual master. Tao Zhenren said, Taoist Zhang, come and take a look. He waved his hand and a water mirror appeared in front of him. It reflected everything that was happening outside of Xianling Island. Zhang Yan focused his attention and saw demonic clouds billowing above the sea. Banners fluttered in the wind and countless demonic soldiers stood in formation with weapons in their hands. He smiled and said, the demonic army has arrived. We can kill the demons once and for all and restore peace to Xianling Island. Chapter 214 Struggle for the Great Tao Full text free reading Chapter 214 Mysterious Spirit Strategy to Kill Demons has been updated. Chapter 478. Struggle for the Great Tao 215 Struggle for the Great Tao free reading Chapter 215 The 9 phases Swallowing Star came from the Clear Feather sect's disciples were enraged by the Reef Manor's demon soldiers. They wished they could go out and fight. However, due to their master's order, they had to stay in the sect. Many of them felt depressed. Ling Tianqing came to Wang Yingfang several times to ask for permission to go out and fight the demon soldiers. In the end, Wang Yingfang became impatient. Her face darkened and she said coldly, who dares to disobey the patriarch's order? Leave now. If you say another word, you will be punished according to the sect rules. Ling Tianqing had no choice but to give up on the idea. However, he could not help but feel indignant. After walking far away, he suddenly turned around and said loudly, Uncle Master, if Master Yang was here, he would not allow these demons to run wild in front of our sect. Wang Yingfang shook her head and did not want to argue with him. Her junior brother Yang Lin had many disciples, but they were all good and bad. While Ling Tianqing's talent was not bad, he was too stubborn and only knew how to show off. If it was not for her junior brother Yang Lin's face, she would have chased Ling Tianqing out of the sect for what he said just now. Ling Tianqing left Wang Yingfang and flew back to his cave residence. Halfway there, he suddenly thought of someone and said, since we can't get through Uncle Master Wang, why don't we ask senior brother Fu Yuqing to help us? The more he thought about it, the more he felt this idea was feasible. Fu Yuqing was different from them. While he was a Clear Feather sect's third-generation disciple in name, due to his high talent, he was personally taught Xian techniques by Tao Zhenren and had reached the core formation level. If this person took the lead, Wang Yingfang might not be able to stop him. After he had this idea, he turned around and headed east. In a flash, he arrived at Fu Yuqing's cave residence. He shouted at the door and a Taoist child came out to welcome him. When he reached the room and saw Fu Yuqing, he could not wait to tell him the purpose of his visit. Then, he showed a hopeful expression. Fu Yuqing shook his head. He said seriously, "Junior brother, since the patriarch has given the order, how can we disobey it?" Ling Tianqing saw that Fu Yuqing said the same. He couldn't help but be disappointed. When Fu Yuqing saw his dejected expression, he smiled and said, "Junior martial brother Ling, why are you so dejected? Patriarch only ordered our disciples not to go out without orders, but he didn't say that we can't fight." Ling Tianxing was confused. "Senior apprentice brother, what do you mean?" Fu Yuqing smiled and said, "Junior apprentice brother, have you forgotten that our Clear Feathers sect has spiritual birds that we can tame aside from our martial arts?" Ling Tianxing was startled for a moment before he realized, yes. Senior martial brother is right. Fu Yuqing looked outside and took out a talisman. He said, "These are the 30,000 bird soldiers that Patriarch entrusted to me to rear. I can use them to kill those demons." He raised his hand and waved the talisman. He made another hand sign and said, "Release." The talisman turned into a ray of green light and flew away. At this moment, Lu Changsu and Cui Mulong were drinking on the surface of the sea. Suddenly, they heard a strange sound coming from mysterious Spirit Island. They couldn't help but look over in surprise. Spiritual birds flew up from the island one after another, forming a black mass. The sound was actually the sound of their wings flapping. There were so many of them that they could cover the sky. Every single one of them was extraordinary, as if they had been nurtured by a secret technique. The 3 heavenly cranes at the front were extraordinary. When they flew to the top of the clouds, they turned their bodies and turned into human forms. They were all wearing golden crowns and white robes. They were beautiful and graceful. Lu Yuanqing sat on the ocean boat and saw the situation clearly. He noticed that the 3 sky cranes also had core formation cultivation and couldn't help but be surprised. So old Tao still had this kind of power hidden in the dark. He thought. He could tell just by looking at these spirit birds. Mysterious Spirit Island's resources were much deeper than he had imagined. If 1 or 2 of their disciples reached nascent soul, they would definitely surpass the Reef Manor. When he thought about this, he was secretly glad. Fortunately, he had forced his way here today. If he waited until old Taoist Tao's wings were fully grown, he would have no other choice but to submit to him. But now, as long as Tao Xinren didn't show up, he had nothing to fear. He looked around and said, "Who wants to come up and fight?" A tall and sturdy elder in a golden robe stood up and said loudly, "These heavenly cranes have cultivated for many years. I'm afraid it will be difficult for the younger generation to deal with them. Also, it won't be a good scene if they fight. Let me take care of them." Lu Yuanqing nodded. "With third uncle here, it will be a piece of cake." "Thank you." The elder in a golden robe cupped his hands at Lu Yuanqing and walked to the front of the big ship. He shook his shoulder and a cloud flew up above his head. He smiled disdainfully at the flock of birds that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. He clasped his hands behind his back and shouted. Suddenly, his belly bulged and he opened his mouth. Suddenly, a vortex appeared in his mouth. A vortex visible to the naked eye appeared out of thin air, stirring up a huge amount of seawater. The elder in a golden robe raised his head again and the vortex went up to the sky. A black wind rose from the sea like a tornado and went straight up to the sky. The flock of spiritual birds just now was flying over. When they saw the sudden change, they knew something was wrong. But before they could turn around, they felt a huge force hit them. They felt dizzy and their bodies started to spin uncontrollably, falling down along the funnel-shaped black wind. Even the 3 sky cranes at the front were unable to resist at all. Before they could even struggle, they fell to the ground. The golden-robed old man pursed his lips again and sucked with all his might. The black wind whistled down and slowly converged into his mouth, not letting a single strand of it go. When all the wind and smoke were collected, the 30,000 spirit birds also disappeared at the same time. He patted his belly in satisfaction and returned to Lu Yuanqing. He cupped his hands and said, "Manor head, I didn't fail you." Lu Yuanqing smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work, third uncle." The elder in a golden robe laughed and waved his hand as if he had done something unimportant and went back to his seat. On the other side, Shui Xingying saw the 30,000 spiritual birds being swallowed by this person and her face paled. She took a few steps closer to Wang Yingfang and said in fear, "Master, what Taoist technique is this? Why is it so powerful?" Wang Yingfang's face was a little ugly and she said in a low voice, "This technique is called 9 phases swallowing stars. It is the direct divine art of the Lu clan. It is said that when cultivated to the extreme, even the stars and moon in the sky can be swallowed. This technique is not something we can block." Although she had heard of this divine art long ago, it was her first time seeing it. She sighed in her heart, the Yuanying cultivators are really not something we core formation cultivators can block. No matter how many of them go, it will only make that person swallow a few more mouthfuls. Just as she was pondering, she suddenly saw a golden ray shooting down from the peak of Xianling Island. It was like a meteor that flew across the sky. When the light reached the surface of the sea, it suddenly exploded. Stars scattered everywhere. In the dazzling golden light, a young Taoist with an extraordinary appearance slowly walked out. He stood in front of the 300,000 demon soldiers alone. Wang Yingfang's spirit was lifted. She heard Tao Xinren say that someone would come out to deal with the demons and she thought it must be this person. She quickly looked up and when she saw the appearance of the Taoist, she was stunned and cried out involuntarily, "Fellow Taoist Zhang." She was expecting Tao Xinren to invite a powerful cultivator, but when she saw that it was Zhang Yan, she was a little disappointed. In her opinion, Zhang Yan did have an extremely brilliant killing technique with the flying sword and could come and go as he pleased. However, it was far from enough to solve the current predicament. Zhang Yan bowed to the big boat and said loudly, "I Qinsang Zhang Yan, invite Manor Master Lu to come out for a chat." Lu Changsu was originally leaning against the chair, and she said in surprise, "Oh, there's still someone from the Pure Feather sect who's willing to come out? He's quite courageous. Could it be that the third elder didn't scare him off just now?" He then frowned and muttered to himself, "Zhang Yan? Why do I feel like I've heard this name before?" When Cui Mulong heard Zhang Yan introducing himself, his expression suddenly froze. He looked at him carefully and his expression changed a few times. He threw the wine cup away and quietly leaped into the air. A light smoke floated toward the west and he left without saying goodbye. At this moment, a few demon generals saw the golden-robed old man's display of power and were itching to give it a try. When they saw Zhang Yan coming over alone, it seemed like they could take advantage of him. They exchanged glances and waved their hands. More than 100 demon soldiers rushed out and surrounded him. Zhang Yan smiled. He did not move, but a clear mist rose from the top of his head and rushed to the blue sky in the blink of an eye. A strong cloud appeared, and the cloud became bigger and bigger. In the end, it became 600 feet in size and hung high in the sky. In an instant, it stirred up the wind and clouds. The demon generals and demon soldiers only felt their breathing become sluggish as a strong force pressed down on their bodies. Before they could cry out in pain, they were swept away by the strong wind and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Lu Changsu did not pay much attention to it at first. He looked like he was watching a good show, but when he saw the situation, he suddenly jumped up and knocked over the table. He was shocked and said, "Spiritual Master Yuanying." Lu Yuanqing's expression was solemn. He did not think that the Clear Feathers sect would actually invite a Yuanying cultivator, which messed up his plan. But that was not all. If it was a normal Yuanying cultivator, he did not need to worry too much. However, the other party was a disciple of the Qinsang school. This was very troublesome. He could not help but look at the two Yuanying elders who shook their heads at him. He pondered for a moment and stood up from his seat. He laughed and said loudly, I am Lu Yuanxing. What business do you have with me? Zhang Yan looked over and smiled. He said, I have come to settle a karma with Manor Head. Lu Yuanxing chuckled and waved his hand. I do not know you. What karma is there to talk about? Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and made a loud noise. He shouted, otherwise, Manor Head Lu's son died because of I am Manor Head Lu. Didn't you come here today for this matter? How can you say that there is no karma? Lu Yuanxing heard this and his eyes suddenly focused on Zhang Yan's face. His killing intent was awe-inspiring. The strong cloud above his head suddenly rolled and rumbled. But after a few breaths, his expression suddenly calmed down. He smiled faintly and shook his head. He said, fellow Taoist, this is a matter between my Reef Manor and the Clear Feathers sect. It has nothing to do with you, so why do you want to take it on? Don't joke around. Struggle for the Great Tao 215_ Struggle for the Great Tao Free Reading _ Chapter 215 9 Phases Devouring Stars completed. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.